Chapter 347. After the storm battle halberd was completed, Su Len directly put it into his storage dimension. In a sense, this weapon was almost like a divine weapon to him. After the weapon upgrade, Su Len began his busy life again. After the defense of the North City, the city walls were heavily damaged, and many people became refugees. These people's houses were destroyed by the earthquake spell in the previous war, and now they needed to be rebuilt. Also, there were some refugees who died because of the collapse of their houses. For these refugees, the city hall came up with a series of relief and disaster relief plans. At the same time, they also gave out a pension. Of course, the pension was not a lot. After all, in this era, human lives were not worth much. Before the houses were rebuilt, these refugees were settled in a few camps. Other than the destroyed houses, the damage was also very serious. Many of the city walls directly collapsed, and some were forcefully twisted by the force of the earth. Even if some of the buildings were still intact, their foundations were damaged, and they needed to be rebuilt. Although it was a lot of work, at least they didn't have to move bricks this time. The reconstruction speed was a lot faster. Su Len handed over the reconstruction work to Wizard Lorraine. This wizard finally didn't have to be an apprentice teacher anymore. The apprentices in the North City had already completed their basic studies. As the saying went, the teacher leads the way, but the training depends on the individual. The North City couldn't take care of these apprentices like a nanny. Although Su Len didn't agree with the way the dark wizards trained their apprentices, he still wouldn't let them live too comfortably. After completing their basic studies, these apprentices began to take on missions and train at the same time. They needed to complete all kinds of missions to accumulate points, and then use the points to exchange for materials and knowledge needed to explore the path of becoming a wizard. The cost of becoming a wizard was very high. Many wizards would share the debt when they taught apprentices or other duties. The cost of learning spells was very expensive, and this was a very profitable business for the big wizard organizations. They sold knowledge and power to earn money and all kinds of resources. The cost of a high-grade wizard was very high. Su Len couldn't always subsidize the Wizard Academy, so he had to teach them how to make money as soon as possible. Most of the magical plants and maintenance work in the arcane garden had already been assigned to the apprentices in the form of missions. As for the secret realm, these apprentices would only be told to them after they became official wizards and signed an even tighter contract with Su Len. From now on, the adept organizations in Northern Fortress City were on the right track. Su Len also began to consider dividing a piece of land to build a wizard academy. North Town City had suffered a lot of casualties in this battle. More than 1,000 soldiers had died. It was the biggest loss in North Town City's history. However, there were also many benefits. Many of North Town City's spearmen had become Spear Imperial Guards, and many of their archers had become divine archers. Su Len did a simple calculation. There were 65 spearmen and 27 archers. As for the half-elves, many of them had become magic archers. This time, Su Luen witnessed the power of magic archers. Half-elf magic archers could add elemental power to their arrows. Most of them were ice, fire, and thunder, but only a few were added with acid damage. Moreover, these magic archers usually mastered 2 kinds of elemental power. Only those who were particularly outstanding would be able to master 3 or more elemental powers. North Town City's training ground. Boom! An explosion sounded, and dust flew everywhere. Su Len raised his eyebrows. He was very surprised by the power of the half-elven magic archer's flame arrow. How many times can you shoot such a powerful flame arrow? Su Len asked the half-elven magic archer next to him. Sir, I can use this attack about 15 times. The half-elven magic archer said respectfully, and I can feel my strength continue to improve. Su Len nodded. He was very satisfied with the magic archer's strength. The flame arrow was about 60 to 70% of the fireball's power. It was also much faster than the fireball. Then, Su Len had the other magic archers demonstrate the power of Frost Arrow, Lightning Arrow, and Acid Arrow. The Frost Arrow was much weaker than the Flame Arrow, but it could freeze the target. Just then, Su Len saw a Frost Arrow freeze the target into an ice sculpture. In order to test its power, Su Len had a barbarian berserker experience it. The barbarian warrior was quite strong. He wasn't frozen, but his speed was reduced. However, after being hit by a few arrows, the barbarian berserker was frozen into an ice sculpture. Of course, he could break out of the ice very quickly. Although the Frost Arrow wasn't very powerful, it was still quite good as a crowd control skill. Similarly, the Lightning Arrow wasn't very powerful, but it also had the debuff of paralysis. The Acid Arrow was also very powerful. One arrow could corrode iron armor. Su Len was very satisfied with the attacks of the half-elven magic archers. These half-elven magic archers could be used as casters. Not only did they have attack power, but they also had crowd control skills. It was a pity that there weren't enough of them. If there were 3,000 half-elven magic archers, they could release flame arrows and 3,000 fireballs at the same time. They could probably destroy the orc army. Looking back, there were less than 500 half-elven magic archers. He could only give up on this idea. Perhaps there would be another half-elven tribe joining Northern Battlefront City in the future. After witnessing the power of the half-elf magic archer, Su Luen became even more curious about the power of the half-elf phantom magic archer. However, the EXP required to become a phantom magic archer was several times more than all the previous EXP added together. It would take a long time before he could see a phantom magic archer. Su Len looked at the talents and attributes of the half-elven magic archers. Their attributes were much better than before. There was also a magic arrow, fire, in their talents. In addition, their range and attack speed were also increased. In Northern Jianbai City, in the training base of the Formation Breaker and the training base of the Shooting Battalion, Su Luen gathered all the soldiers of the Spear Imperial Guards and the archers who had met the conditions for advancement. They were ready to advance. Su Len was very familiar with the training process. He arranged a few soldiers who had successfully advanced to the Formation Breaker and Sniper training base to explain to them. After the explanation, he let them start training. This time, there were a total of 92 soldiers participating in the advancement ceremony. Su Len was looking forward to how many people would successfully advance to the Formation Breaker and Sniper training base. After arranging these people to advance, Su Len looked at the large number of damaged marks on the strategic map with a headache. Although the war ended in a few days, the aftermath was very bad. The most obvious was the irrigation facilities outside the city. Because of the war, a large number of water supply canals outside the city were destroyed. A large number of farmland were also destroyed. These places also needed a large number of people to restore. The slaves in the Northern Battlefront City were very obedient now. After seeing the Northern Battlefront City defeated the powerful orc army, these slaves were all silent. A week quickly passed. The reconstruction of the Northern Battlefront City was progressing smoothly. The residents whose houses had collapsed had their houses redistributed. The structure of the newly built houses and the previous houses had some changes. The main change was that they had some earthquake resistance. The structure of the houses had improved. Even if there was another earthquake, there would not be a complete collapse. The properties of these houses also had a new earthquake resistance plus 15 attribute. Su Len also planned to renovate the other houses in the Northern Battlefront City to increase their earthquake resistance. The residents who received the new houses quickly started their new lives. Some of the people whose family members had died in the earthquake also received compensation from the city hall. Once again, they came to the training camp. After a week of intense training, all the spear guards looked very sharp. After a week of training, they had adjusted their condition to the best. Now, they had to face the final obstacle. After fusing with the advanced light ball of the Formation Breaker, the 65 spear guards entered the training camp's quiet room in batches. Su Luan took out the advanced light ball of the formation breaker and gave it to everyone. Then, the 20 spear guards began to fuse with it. The chance of advancing to the formation breaker camp was around 20%. If there were no accidents, 13 of the 65 people would successfully advance. Su Len anxiously paced back and forth. Time passed minute by minute. Soon, it was the last 10 minutes. This was their deadline. At this time, a light ball appeared in front of him. Su Len was disappointed. He put the light ball back into the tiger tally. This meant that one of the spear guards had lost the chance to advance. Then, a few more light balls appeared. Su Len's expression became more and more serious. In the system interface, there were still a few spear guards who were in the process of advancing. There was only 1 minute left. Su Len felt that this 1 minute was more torturous than the previous 2 hours. When the time reached 0, the system interface indicated that the spear guards had successfully advanced. Seeing that 5 spear guards had successfully advanced to the formation breaker camp, Su Len let out a sigh of relief. After that, another 20 spear guards entered the quiet room to level up. 2 hours later, another 4 spear guards successfully leveled up. After all of the spear guards finished leveling up, 15 of the 65 spear guards had successfully leveled up to become break camp. In addition to the soldiers who had advanced to the formation breaker camp, North Town now had 20 formation breaker camp soldiers. They were one step closer to the 700 formation breaker camp. After the formation breaker camp advanced, the archers began to advance to the sound shooting camp. After a series of advancements, 6 of the 27 archers had successfully advanced. The sound shooting camp's team had grown stronger. Chapter 348. It was getting cold, and it began to snow in the northern town. Su Luan got up from the bed with some difficulty. 2 half-elf maids walked in with toiletries and a basin of water. Angie looked at Phyllis, who was lying on the bed. The little succubus had returned to the underground city early in the morning. Hathaway and Alex had also gone to the wizard tower. Only Phyllis hadn't woken up yet. After the big battle last night, Su Len felt refreshed. The others were fine, but Phyllis couldn't take it anymore. After all, she was just a normal human who hadn't learned any combat skills or magic. She wasn't Su Len's opponent at all. Angela pouted and helped Su Len wash up. She was obviously still holding a grudge. Seeing their expressions, Su Len smiled and slapped their round and perky buttocks. They were very bouncy. After washing up, the 2 maids helped him put on his clothes. Su Len suddenly said in their ears, "You 2 will join us tonight." Hearing Su Len's words, the 2 maids blushed. Although they had been trained by Su Len several times, the 2 half-elf maids were still very shy. Seeing their expressions, Su Len knew that it would be another sleepless night. After leaving the Lord's castle, Su Len went to Hathaway's lab. He was going to give her the wisdom leaf. After killing the legendary troll last time, Hathaway gained a lot of experience and successfully leveled up. However, she was still a distance away from becoming a legendary. The wisdom leaf could increase the power of the will by 3 points, which was perfect for Hathaway. Su Luan also wanted Hathaway to level up quickly so that she could master the Tower Spirit technology and install a Tower Spirit in the Wizard Tower in Northern Town. After finding Hathaway, Hathaway was surprised that Su Len took out another wisdom leaf. After all, it was a treasure that could perfectly increase the power of the will without any side effects. It was invaluable to wizards. The elemental pool in the Wizard Tower had been built. Due to the invasion of the Orc army, the construction of the Wizard Tower was interrupted for a period of time. Now, the construction of the Wizard Tower had started again. This time, they were building the ecological park of the Wizard Tower. The information of the ecological park was obtained from the secret realm. Tower Spirit No. 1 stored the complete ecological park construction technology. However, To build a complete ecological park, Hathaway's current ability was not enough. According to the information of Tower Spirit No. 1, during the Arcane Empire era, the largest and most expensive ecological park built by the Arcanists directly used a half-plane to build it. The ecological park's area of millions of square kilometers. Such a huge ecological park was completely attached to the floating cities. It was the logistics and material base of the floating city. That kind of top ecological park, if no one told you about it, you might always think that it was the main material plane. Hathaway was not capable of building such a huge ecological park. It was said that the ecological park of the floating city was built by more than a dozen legendary masters. It was comparable to the ecological park of a material plane. It was not something that one or two legendary spellcasters could do. In the Arcane Empire, there was an arcanist who had a sudden idea to transform an empty half-plane into a material plane. It was said that the project took nearly 1,000 years. The arcanist also got the title of Creator. In fact, the legendary arcanists were already very powerful. They could do almost anything that the gods could do. This was also why the arcanists did not fear the gods. Imagine if they had the power to rival the gods. How much respect would they have for the gods? According to the curious nature of the arcanists, it was good enough that they did not capture the gods for research. In the eyes of the arcanists, the so-called gods were also a more powerful life form. Although the arcanists did not study the gods, they had studied divinity and divine power. That was one of the reasons for the conflict between the Arcane Empire and the gods. In the eyes of the gods, the arcanists had crossed the line. The success of the arcanists' research on divinity was limited. Some of the arcanists who had studied divinity deeply even transformed into lichas and finally advanced into demigod lichas. If one day you come across a golden skull with a clock and a diamond embedded on it, then you'd better pray for your own fortune. It was definitely one of the most difficult monsters in the multiverse. There were a lot of technologies involved in creating an ecological park. It wasn't easy to create an ecological park, but if it was completed, then the ecological park could be used to create a complex environment. Creatures that were already on the verge of extinction would be able to seek help. Su Len once saw information about a large ecological park in the data of the Tower Spirit No. 1. The arcanists cultivated a species that had long disappeared in the outside world in the ecological park. That ecological park was built by the arcanists with dinosaurs as the dominant species. A large number of dinosaurs lived in the ecological park. The ecological park was originally a species breeding ground. Every time the number of monsters in the ecological park increased, a harvest would be carried out. The ecological park in the Wizard Tower was not built too big. To build a large ecological park, a large number of space expansion spells were needed. Otherwise, it would be meaningless if the space was small. First, he tried the space expansion spell to increase the space inside the Wizard Tower. Space expansion was a spell that was easy to learn but hard to master. This spell had a wide range of applications, and the most common one was the multidimensional bag, or space bag. Normal wizards could expand their space by 20% or more, but there were also some who could expand their space by 100, 1, or even more. Hathaway's current ability could expand the space expansion to 70 times. If they wanted to build an ecological park, they would need to expand the space in the Wizard Tower. In addition to the space expansion spell, they would also need to make an environment control rune circle to control the changes in the space at any time. At the same time, they would also need to build a large enough shield to isolate the ecological park from the outside world and maintain the balance of the internal ecosystem. The cost of building an ecological park was very high. It could be said that it was second only to the elemental pool. However, there were many benefits after the construction was completed. The Wizard Tower could have an ecological park that could replenish resources at any time. Su Len was currently only an intermediate wizard, so he could only be an assistant. He could only wait for others to do the important things. Su Len was very envious of wizards who had gifts like eidetic memory, and encyclopedic memory. There was too much knowledge to be learned as a wizard. After all this time, Su Lin still had a lot to learn. A gift like eidetic memory was also a gift that could be cultivated. The best gift for eidetic memory was encyclopedic memory. However, it was not impossible for Su Lin. Opening treasure chests gave him the opportunity to obtain the eidetic memory talent. If he couldn't find it, he could master the encyclopedic knowledge talent first and then upgrade it with the legendary skill points. According to the records of Hathaway, eidetic memory was very rare in the history of their school for 2,000 to 3,000 years. There were less than 5 of them in total. This showed how rare this gift was. After leaving the wizard tower, Su Lin walked around the city and looked at the progress of the various works in the northern city. Then, he went to the underground world through the teleportation circle. The underground world was still dark. Alex had also been helping in the underground world during this time, but Su Lin felt that she should have come here to hide and relax. Recently, it was the breeding season of the harpies. Many low-level harpies were capturing males in the wilderness. It was a bit of a ruckus during this time. Su Lin did not have a good solution for this situation. He also could not change the habits of the species. Perhaps it would be possible after he advanced to legendary. When he saw Alex, she was studying a spell. Su Lin glanced at it. It was Bigby's Palm of Defense. This spell was a level 5 spell, but it was several times more difficult than other level 5 spells. This god-slaying spell was not a joke. Su Lin had studied it before, but he quickly gave up. Alex had been analyzing the spell model for so many days and still had not made much progress. In the structure of the spell model of Bigby's Palm of Defense, there were many rather complicated spell nodes and spell circuits. If the spell model was compared to a circuit board, then other level 5 spells would be as difficult as a calculator, while Bigby's Palm of Defense would be as difficult as a calculator. It required astonishing memory and analytical ability. According to Sullen's estimation, it was almost more difficult to master than level 7 spells. After looking at it for a while, Su Lin shook his head and left. He should wait until his level was higher to learn this spell. Su Lin strolled along the road and then came to the west gate of Crete. As soon as he arrived, he saw a scene. The little succubus, Chris, was wearing a leather coat and holding a small whip. She was wearing heels that were at least 10 centimeters high. She was walking with a little smug steps. Behind her was a monster that looked like a hound. However, compared to a hound, this dog had 3 heads. Behind the little succubus was a 3-headed hellhound that seemed to have just hatched a few days ago. At this moment, she was tying it around her neck with a pink rope and walking it as if she were walking a dog. The newly hatched hellhound was not large in size. However, its eyes were full of ferocity. Occasionally, when someone passed by, it would open its mouth and growl, showing its teeth as if it was about to pounce. A hellhound? Where did it come from? Chapter 349. The Cerberus was a creature from the lower plane. Just from its name, one could tell that it belonged to hell. Although hell was a lower plane, it was the complete opposite of the abyss. The devils of hell belonged to the lawful evil faction, while the demons of the abyss belonged to the chaotic evil faction. At the border between the abyss and Bator, on the 10,000 abyss plane, the demons and devils had been fighting for thousands of years, but usually, the devils had the upper hand. The war between the devils and demons had been going on for thousands of years, and it looked like it would continue. What made Su Lin feel strange was how a demon like Chris had caught a devil as a pet. If he used an alignment detection spell to identify Chris's alignment, he would discover that the little succubus had actually started to deviate from the chaotic faction to the lawful faction. In fact, Su Lin didn't know that succubi had started to deviate from the lawful faction ever since the succubus queen. Chris's change was so obvious mostly because of Su Lin. Su Lin belonged to the lawful faction, and he hated chaos. The most obvious reason was the strict rules and regulations set up in Northgard City. It wasn't surprising that Chris had deviated from the chaotic faction to the lawful faction. The growth cycle of the Cerberus was somewhat slow. However, it possessed combat power very early on. When the Cerberus was just born, it could easily kill an adult male who had not undergone combat training. After a few days, the Cerberus fangs and claws would grow out. The challenge difficulty would also increase to level 2. The untamed Cerberus was full of wildness, and it was completely pulled forward by Chris with a rope. Although it dared to bare its fangs and brandish its claws at others, it had a fearful expression when it looked at Chris. It was obvious that it had suffered a lot because of Chris. When the Cerberus looked at Sulen, its body clearly trembled a few times. It was obvious that the Cerberus with its soul sense had smelled the danger emanating from Sulen's body. "Master, I summoned this 2 days ago." Chris waved the rope in her hand and trotted over. The Cerberus behind her was pulled by the rope and stumbled as it was dragged over by Chris. "What are you waiting for? Quick, greet the master." As she spoke, Chris lightly pulled her whip and dragged out the Cerberus hiding behind her. She raised her foot and gave it a kick. Cerberus looked at the human in front of it timidly, but in the next second, it seemed to have thought of something. It ran over and rubbed its 3 heads against Sulen's feet. It was obvious that this guy was trying to please Sulen. "Since you like it, you can keep it," Sulen said as he looked at the Cerberus under his feet. "This thing was pretty good for guarding the house. It hasn't had time to give it a name yet." "Master, you can give it one," Chris said happily. Sulen pondered for a moment and then said, "Let's call it Husky." "Alright, let's call it Husky. His nickname is Buttface." Although he didn't know the meaning of a husky, since it was given by his master, there must be a reason for it. Moreover, the name Buttface was quite pleasing to the mouth. As for whether the Cerberus agreed or not, it didn't matter. Cerberus, Husky? Buttface? Then Chris happily led the Cerberus around the city. She wanted to let the people know that the people living in Crete were not ordinary people. Most of them were from the evil camp. She didn't want to accidentally get stewed. Looking at the little succubus walking the dog excitedly, Sulen shook his head slightly. Since she wanted to keep the dog, he would let her keep it. Even if it was an adult, a Cerberus would not be able to afford a dog meat hotpot. Ignoring Chris, Sulen went to Orlando City in the underground world and put away all the mithril and magic gems that he had excavated during this time. The construction of the Wizard Tower required a lot of materials, especially the construction of the ecological park. This batch of materials was prepared for the ecological park. In fact, the ecological park of the Wizard Tower was still in the experimental stage. It was an application of the ecological park technology. When the ecological park of the Wizard Tower was completed, he planned to build the ecological park in the secret realm as well. However, the ecological park in the secret realm would be much larger. Sulen wanted to build an ecological park that could raise large dinosaurs or Euron, as described in the information of the Tower Spirit. After patrolling the underground world and killing some monsters around his territory, Sulen returned to the northern town. After sending all kinds of resources to Hathaway, Sulen returned to the northern town and began to study as a wizard. Because of his naturally high power of the will and good control of energy, Sulen's progress was very fast when he first started learning as a wizard. However, when he became an intermediate wizard, his learning speed slowed down a lot. Sulen's early advantage had been used up, so his learning speed was not faster than other wizards. In fact, he was slower than other wizards because of his lack of basic knowledge. After all, Sulen did not learn the basics of wizardry since he was a child. Luckily, with Hathaway's thoughtful guidance, Sulen was also constantly strengthening his foundation. After returning to the northern town, Sulen took care of all kinds of things and began to read all kinds of wizardry books. There were quite a lot of books in the northern town. Some of them were brought by Hathaway, some by Karina, and some by grace. In addition to the research of Alex and the others, although the books in the northern town were not as good as those in the wizard schools, they were not worse than those small schools. After opening the book, Sulen picked up a goose feather pen and began to copy on a snow-white paper. The paper he was using now was the best paper made by the northern town's papermaking workshop after several improvements. It could completely replace parchment in writing books. The price of a piece of paper like this was 1 kinnar, which was more than 10 times cheaper than parchment. Sulen rubbed his head. Soon, the paper was filled with dense symbols. These symbols were the foundation of a spell. What the f*ck? Why do I feel like I was studying advanced mathematics in university in my previous life? Sulen felt a little dizzy. He got up and opened the window of the study room to get some fresh air. Then, he made himself a cup of black tea to wake himself up. It was too difficult. After entering the 5th circle of spells, the difficulty would increase tremendously. After studying for half a day, he had only analyzed half of the 5th circle spell. He had not even touched the other half. He had been studying this spell model for a week, but until now, he had not even completed the spell model. According to this progress, it would be considered fast if he could learn this spell in a month. He was now very envious of his peers. It was said that they had the chip with them when they transmigrated. No matter how complicated the spell model was, they only needed to scan it once to record it. Moreover, not only could they record it easily, but they could also optimize and improve the model. This was a godly tool for wizards. Unfortunately, although he had transmigrated with a golden finger, this system did not have the ability to record spell models and analyze them. After drinking the black tea and resting for a while, Sulen continued to work hard. The analysis of the spell model was half completed. There were dozens of papers full of symbols and words on the table. Beside them, there were also notes left by Hathaway on spell model analysis. Ding! Congratulations, host. After a long period of study, you have obtained part of the information of the ability, Scholar. The experience of the ability, Scholar, is full. Congratulations, host. You have mastered the support ability, Scholar. Hearing the system prompt, Sulen was relieved. Obviously, his hard work during this period of time had paid off. Of course, the ability, Scholar, could only be considered average. It was far from Hathaway's. Sulen had only recently discovered that Hathaway had mastered the 2 abilities, Encyclopedic Knowledge, and Sage. These 2 abilities were not used for combat, but were support abilities. These support abilities had no use for combat, but had a miraculous effect on learning. Sulen was now learning all kinds of knowledge of wizards, so naturally, he wanted to master these abilities. With these 2 abilities, he could at least reduce the difficulty of learning by half, and increase the efficiency by 1 or 2 times. The way to obtain the Sage ability was simpler. Its prerequisite was the Scholar ability. As long as it was studied systematically, it could be mastered. The Scholar ability that Sulen had now could increase his learning speed. Scholar, support ability. After a long period of systematic study, you have mastered a large amount of knowledge. You have become wiser, and your learning speed has increased. After obtaining the Scholar ability, Sulen's learning speed and comprehension ability had increased to a certain extent. In fact, there were many spells that wizards used to support learning. The most famous one was the Enlightenment spell. This spell could make an idiot similar to a normal person. Naturally, it could increase a normal person's intelligence. However, this spell was very difficult to cast, and there was a certain price to pay. In addition to the Enlightenment spell, there was also the Wishing spell that had the same effect. Although the Wishing spell had many disadvantages, if this spell was used well, it could be said to be an all-purpose spell. Of course, if you used this spell to fulfill some unreliable wishes, the final result would be very miserable. Moreover, the price to fulfill the wish was not something that anyone could afford. Regarding this spell, there were some records of the failure of the wishing spell in Hathaway's books. One of the wizards wished for eternal life. Even the gods could not do this, and he could not afford to pay the price. In the end, the wizard's wish was fulfilled. He was directly cast on life hiding, and then he was sealed in a coffin. He was hidden in a space crack in the multiverse by the Jinn. Chapter 350. After using life concealment and being sealed, the sorcerer would enter a state of suspended animation and be thrown to some unknown corner of the multiverse. This was indeed a different kind of eternal life. However, the process was a little different from what he had imagined. Later on, after the wizard studied the wishing spell in detail, they even summoned the devil to help perfect it. Finally, they came up with a book of rules for using the wishing spell. The book listed the various rules of the wishing spell in detail, and they also came up with a set of words specially used to use the wishing spell. Because of this, the wishing spell finally became more and more worthy of its name. These two spells required a high price. In addition to these two spells, there were other spells that had a much lower price, such as magic memory. After casting this spell, the caster's memory would temporarily increase, almost to the point of having a photographic memory. However, after the spell ended, the caster's brain would suffer serious repercussions. Dizziness and nausea were just the basics. In serious cases, it would cause severe headaches. Moreover, this spell could not be used too often, or it would damage the soul. Although there were many shortcomings, this spell was still used by wizards in large numbers. After all, it could quickly memorize knowledge. Although it would be a little uncomfortable afterwards, it was still acceptable. With the scholar ability, Sullen's learning speed had increased a little. If he had skill points now, he could directly enhance scholar to sage. Unfortunately, he had already used up the skill points he got from leveling up. Sulen now realized the lack of skill points, which was why he began to slowly learn skills by himself instead of directly using skill points to enhance them. After learning more about the wizard profession, Su Luan realized that there was never enough skill points. There were too many skills and abilities that a wizard needed to learn. Many wizards had to choose the path of becoming a wizard. Maximal spell, silent spell cast, and instant spell cast, these three metamagic abilities represented three different paths of becoming a wizard. Extreme spell, when using this ability, the effect of the spell will be maximized, including damage value, healing effect, number of people affected, etc. At the cost of 3 times the mana, the lethality of a spell will be increased by 100%. Note, this special class requires mastering the ability to enhance magic. Silent spellcasting, when using this ability, casting spells does not require any casting action or incantation. It can be cast in a silent state. Silent spellcasting ignores any silent spells. The chances of the enemy discovering the wizard casting spells will be reduced until the moment the spell is completed. Using this ability to cast spells will consume double the amount of mana, and the casting time will be extended. Instant spell, when using this specialty, you can instantly cast a spell. At the cost of consuming 3 times your mana and increasing the casting difficulty by 2 levels, you can turn a spell into an instant spell. Instant spells cannot be interrupted by any conventional means and are immune to any silent spell and counterspell. These 3 spell specialties represented 3 different paths of becoming a wizard. Of course, this did not mean that one could only choose one out of the 3. It was just that most wizards with limited talent could only choose one. Of course, there were also many talented wizards who would choose 2 or 3. Among them, Extreme Spell belonged to the damage output category. It could greatly increase the power of spells. With this spell, even Arcane Missile could have the power of a sniper rifle. If one wanted to choose extreme damage output or a violent wizard, this specialty should not be missed. Think about the effect of a fireball that could clear out an area with an aerial bomb. Silent spellcasting was a specialty that suited the old Yin coins. They were the kind of people who would laugh in front of people and attack from behind. The casting of spells was very subtle, and it was almost impossible to detect. It would only be exposed at the end of the spell. This specialty was the most popular among the old Yin coins. The last one was instant spell. This was a relatively difficult specialty to master. Its effect was stronger than silent spellcasting, but it was also much harder to master. Moreover, after these two spells were promoted to legendary, one could continue to master silent spellcasting and instant spellcasting. After mastering silent spellcasting from 0 to 9 circles, all spells of the corresponding level would become silent spellcasting, and the penalty time and mana penalty would be removed. The same was true for instant spellcasting. The casting difficulty and mana penalty would be removed. However, it was not easy to master a legendary specialty. In the past, many wizards wanted to learn instant spellcasting. They planned to master instant spellcasting from 0 to 9 circles as soon as they entered the legendary realm. In the end, they would be able to instant spellcasting from 0 to 9 circles. Of course, so far, no wizard had succeeded on this path. The most powerful wizard in recorded history only managed to level up instant spellcasting to level 6, but even so, it was already very powerful. Therefore, the wizards later turned these 3 spellcasting specialties into 3 paths of wizardry. After choosing a spellcasting specialization, it would decide which path to walk in the future. It would decide whether to choose the most powerful path of wizardry or another path that was easier to achieve. Hathaway chose the path of instant casting, which was the most difficult path to walk. Only wizards with absolute confidence would walk this path. Legendary instant casting wasn't something that anyone could learn. In fact, Sulen also planned to take this path. He was a little greedy, so he wanted to master instant spellcasting as well. When the time came, he would have instant spellcasting and extreme spellcasting. However, it would be a few times more difficult to succeed. Sulen had the confidence to choose these 2 paths because of the existence of the system. Because of the system, he had the opportunity to get more skill points to learn spellcasting specialties. Even legendary skill points were not impossible. Since he had decided to be a wizard, he planned to be the strongest. There were many spellcasting specialties that he needed to master in the future. Proficient spellcasting, and battle spellcasting, were only the most basic spellcasting talents. Empower spellcasting, extreme spellcasting, instant spellcasting, spell penetration, and spell expansion, all needed to be mastered, as well as the advanced states of these specialties, extreme spellcasting, instant spellcasting, and finally, legendary spellcasting. Others might not be able to master spellcasting specialties and legendary specialties in their lifetime, but for Sulen, he might be able to master them by killing a few legendary figures. He had already announced that as long as he killed a legendary figure, he would be able to get a legendary skill point, and the legendary skill point could be used to upgrade his spellcasting specialties to legendary spellcasting specialties. But before that, what Sulen needed to master now was the spell in front of him. In fact, other than these paths of wizards, there were other paths of wizards, such as battle spellcasting wizards, explosiveness wizards, control wizards, summoning wizards, and transformation wizards. Transformation wizards were also known as close combat wizards, or berserker wizards. This type of wizard's battle mode was very bold and unrestrained. They did not cast spells, but directly picked up their weapons and attacked like a berserker. They chose to dual-wield weapons, gain proficiency in weapons, and then increase vitality, strength, and dexterity. When they saw the enemy, they would directly attack. This type of wizard was even more difficult to deal with than a berserker. There were a few very famous representatives of this type of wizard. Of course, this type of close combat wizard had many different ways of adding points. For example, they could add spirit. After casting the transformation spell, spirit would be directly added to strength and dexterity, but the price was that they would temporarily lose their spellcasting ability. There were also some more extreme ones who added points to vitality, strength, and dexterity, and then learned a holy light spell to open up the invincible mode. The most suitable path for this was the Dragon Disciple Warlock, and then the part-time wizard. The warlock with the Dragon Disciple's strength, vitality, and dexterity were almost not inferior to a warrior of the same level. Because of the part-time wizard, all the skill points and attribute points did not have to be allocated to physical professions. They could achieve a true dual cultivation of magic and martial arts. Of course, if you had the blood of the gods, you could also do this. For example, the white-robed wizard Gandalf was one of the best. Of course, this path was only for those with talent. If you had the Dragon Disciple, the blood of the gods, or other powerful blood, such as the Titan, this path would be very suitable for you. If you didn't have it, then don't think about it. If you forced yourself to take this path, your achievements would be extremely limited. Su Lan had the system as a cheat, and his combat power was also very strong. Now, he had embarked on this path of dual cultivation of magic and martial arts, and the success rate was very high. There was also a special spell for close combat wizards among the wizards. This set of spells had been passed down from the era of the Arcane Empire. It was called Bigby's 5 Consecutive Palms. After Su Lan learned about this series of spells, he named this set of spells, the Buddha's Palm. This set of spells was created by Bigby, who became one of the most famous combat wizards in history as an ordinary person, with no other blood. Bigby's Protective Palm, Bigby's Flying Palm, Bigby's Capture Palm, Bigby's Vajra Palm, Bigby's Crushing Palm. This set of spells could create a palm to fight, especially the Crushing Palm. The power exerted was completely the Buddha's palm. With one palm, smashing a castle into pieces was just a basic operation. Legendary warriors were nothing in front of this set of spells. It was said that when this set of spells was created, it was the same as the Melf series of spells. It was used to deal with the gods, but so far, these two sets of spells had not been successful in killing the gods. Su Lan now had a Bigby's Protective Palm spell scroll, but this spell was very difficult to learn. He couldn't learn it now, but he had made up his mind that if he had the chance in the future, he would learn all of this set of spells. Chapter 351. Time passed by quietly. While Su Lan was studying the path of a wizard, Hathaway was also building ecoparks. The Dimension Expansion spell kept expanding the space in the wizard tower. The Dimension Expansion spell required strong maneuverability. It could not tear the space apart. At the same time, the space had to be expanded as much as possible. Only then could there be enough space. After expanding the space had to be reinforced. Although this process was cumbersome and required a lot of precious magic materials, there were still a lot of resource points in the North Town city. Otherwise, she would not have the money to do this. Su Lan spent the night with Hathaway and asked her about the wishing spell. Normally, the wishing spell would summon an elemental jinn. These elemental jinn were at least demigod level. After many years of research, the wizards had discovered that the wishing spell could fulfill many wishes. This included reviving someone who could be revived, gaining a lot of wealth, recovering one's power, eliminating a disaster, increasing one's power, and so on. In theory, the wishing spell could grant any wish, but it was not guaranteed that it would succeed. The price to pay for using the wishing spell was not a normal item. Usually, it was soul energy or soul shard. If there were not enough soul shards, the spell would draw out the person's soul energy. Of course, other precious items could also be used, such as divinity. There was a limit to how much one could increase one's power with the wishing spell. For example, the attribute points could only increase one's basic attribute points by 5, and the cost would only increase as time went on. There was a limit to the number of attribute points that could be increased by the wishing spell. The maximum was 40 points. Su Len did not lack attribute points. What he wanted now was talents. It was not easy to get a legendary talent, but it was not difficult to get a legendary talent, so Su Len decided to give it a try. The wishing spell was divided into limited wishing spell and legendary wishing spell. Both could summon an elemental Jinn, but the legendary wishing spell was more powerful than the limited wishing spell. Of course, the cost was also much higher. There were no legendary wizards in the North Town City, so the legendary wishing spell was impossible. However, the limited wishing spell was still possible. After learning the characteristics of the wishing spell from Hathaway, Su Len decided to use the limited wishing spell to increase his power. Hathaway thought for a moment and said, "The limited wishing spell is a level 7 spell. Alex can cast it too, and the effect should be better than mine. Then I'll ask Alex to cast the limited wishing spell tomorrow." It was a quiet night. The next day, Su Len told Alex about his idea of using the limited wishing spell. And Alex nodded immediately. The casting of the limited wishing spell was not difficult, but for the sake of insurance, Su Len decided to build a wishing platform. The wishing platform was not big, and the construction was very simple. Under the guidance of Alex, Su Len sent a team of craftsmen to build the platform. The craftsmen in the North Town City had been trained for a long time, and their skills were absolutely qualified. It only took them a day to build the platform. The next step was for Alex to arrange the runic matrix. It was not too difficult for Alex to arrange the runic matrix for the wishing spell. Su Len only needed to provide some magic materials. It took almost half a day for the wishing table to be completed. "Are you ready?" Alex appeared next to the platform. She looked at Su Len with calm eyes and said slowly, "The limited wishing spell has an extra cost. Later, I will draw the power of the elemental pool to complete the spell, but you still need to negotiate with the Jinn. What you can get depends on you. Remember the words I told you, and be careful with the Jinn. When you are ready, I will start." Su Len nodded and said, "Let's start." A ray of light appeared. With Alex activating the power of the wishing platform, the energy of the elemental pool began to pour into the wishing platform, and the arcane crystals around suddenly shone with a strange light. Then a low spell sounded, and a strange elemental power began to gather on the wishing platform. The surrounding space gradually distorted, and with the gathering of the power of the spell, a powerful divine power came to this world. The Jinn. When the Jinn appeared, Su Len felt the powerful force, and then a whirlwind appeared out of thin air. The next second, a terrible pressure shrouded here. This kind of pressure was like the dragon's power on the dragon, and it was more powerful than the dragon's power, but it did not have that kind of overbearing aura. With a flash of light, a creature full of powerful power and divine brilliance appeared on the wishing platform. It looked like a Jinn. Its appearance was a bit like the lamp spirit in the magic lamp, and its upper body was still in human form. Its skin was pale green, and there seemed to be a flash of lightning in its pupils from time to time. It was the light of divinity. Any Jinn summoned by the wishing spell was at the level of a god. It was impossible to judge the level of strength of the one in front of him, but it was certainly a Jinn above the demigod level. The Jinn of the elemental plane had special rules. They followed the constraints of contracts and laws and would trade with spellcasters when needed. After coming to this world, it first glanced around, and then its eyes fell on Su Len. The Jinn frowned slightly after seeing Su Len, and then said, "You have the power of divinity, young man, are you summoning me?" "Interesting young man. Are you sure you want to trade with me? Tell me your wishes and prayers." Su Len looked at the Jinn in front of him with some curiosity. In fact, the Jinn did not come here with its original body, but an avatar. Only when there were some special wishing spells would the real body come. The elemental Jinn summoned by the wishing spell was random. Usually, it was a demigod-level elemental Jinn. As for the demigod-level elemental Jinn, they would only respond to the summoner according to their own preferences. Sometimes, if they were lucky, they would also summon the God of Elements messengers and gods. As for the elemental Lord God, the summoner of this powerful god must have very strong strength to invite them. All the jinn, including the elemental Lord God, belonged to the absolute neutral camp. They would trade with anyone, even demons. The one in front of Sulen was at least a demigod-level elemental jinn, and it might even be an oracle. Seeing that Sulen did not respond to him, the jinn seemed to be impatient and urged, "Hurry up and tell me your wish, I don't have time to chat with you." Wind Elemental Jinn, Wind Whisperer, Theodore, Minor Divine Power. Today, he suddenly felt that there was a creature in the multiverse that seemed to have the blood of the wind god calling him. He was curious, so he responded to the call and appeared here. Sulen did not hesitate and immediately said, "I want to improve some of my abilities." The jinn looked at Sulen and then said, "What ability do you need to improve? Do you know the rules of ability improvement? Attributes above 40 can't be increased." "I know," Sulen nodded and said. "All right then, this is a contract. Write down your wishes." With that, the jinn of Wind Elemental took out a piece of parchment and a quill pen out of thin air and began to write quickly. After a while, a contract was written. Next, the jinn of Wind Elemental handed the contract scroll to Sulen. Sulen carefully took the contract. This kind of contract had a powerful force. Once it was signed, the violation of the contract would be severely punished. Sulen was very cautious about the contract. The jinn usually used some word games and left all kinds of traps or hidden dangers in July like the devil. If he was not careful and did not find them, it was likely that he would pay a lot of resources without getting any benefits. Sulen looked at the contract word by word. Once there was an ambiguity in the language, he would immediately argue with the jinn. At this time, Sulen also saw the face of the jinn. This guy was really cunning. He had been using various ways to distort Sulen's consciousness, or only the literal meaning. All kinds of out-of-context words were used, and even ambiguous words were used. If Sulen had not learned how to deal with these jinn, he would have been cheated. To deal with these jinn, he should let the devil or the lawyer confront them. After a difficult negotiation, the two sides finally reached an agreement. Then the jinn handed the modified contract to Sulen. Sulen carefully confirmed 3 times that there were no loopholes and ambiguities, then he nodded and agreed to the contract. "What ability do you want to improve? Agility? Charm? Spirit? Or is it a talent?" "I'm going to learn a talent, erudite," Sulen said. It was not that he didn't want to get the eidetic memory ability, but this ability was a legendary ability. If he wanted to master this ability, the price he had to pay was too high. It was too painful. Erudite? Okay. The jinn looked at Sulen and said. Then he picked up a goose feather pen and quickly wrote down the transaction. Then he handed it to Sulen and said with a smile, "You need to support a part of the power of the soul, or pay a legendary elemental stone. If there is no problem, then sign your name on this contract." Sulen took the contract again, and then checked it again to confirm that the contract was exactly the same as Sulen's request. After checking it 5 times in a row and confirming that there was no problem, Sulen signed his name on the contract scroll. "Very well, the contract is established." The jinn waved his hand gently, and the contract instantly turned into countless auras and dissipated in the air. Then a powerful divine power fell from the sky and fell on Sulen. Chapter 352. With the appearance of the divine power, the legendary soul crystal in Sulen's hand disappeared, and the system prompt sounded in his ear. "You used the spell Limited Wish. According to the contract, you will pay a legendary soul crystal to the wind elemental spirit, and then you will get the auxiliary talent, Sage. Contract completed. The effect of Limited Wish has been activated. Ritual completed. Congratulations, your auxiliary talent, Scholar, has been upgraded to Sage. Talent, Sage. After a lot of reading, your knowledge has been further improved. Your memory ability and analysis ability have been further strengthened. When learning spells, you can analyze the structure of spells more quickly and easily. You can grasp a lot of knowledge, and you can understand some spells better. You can optimize and modify spells, learning speed increased by 100%, and spell learning difficulty reduced by 50%. After the ritual, Sulen felt that there was a lot of knowledge in his mind that he didn't have before. This was the knowledge brought by the Sage talent. At this time, Sulen clearly felt that his brain had become very active, and his thoughts were very clear. Many spells that he didn't understand before suddenly became clear at this moment. Interesting young man, goodbye. After the contract was completed, the wind elemental spirit looked at Sulen, and then turned into a wisp of smoke and disappeared. The power that shrouded the surroundings also disappeared. After having the Sage talent, Sulen's speed of learning spells became faster. He was like a sponge that greedily absorbed all kinds of knowledge. In the blink of an eye, a few days passed. Sulen finally finished analyzing the shadow tentacle, and began to learn it. After completely analyzing this spell, it was only a matter of time for Sulen to master this spell. It wouldn't take long for him to successfully cast this spell, and he would officially become an advanced wizard. Shadow Tentacle was an evocation spell. It used shadow energy to create a tentacle, and then it would instantly entangle the enemy. After entanglement, it would absorb the energy and physical strength of the entangled person. If the entangled person couldn't break free quickly, the entangled person's strength would become weaker and weaker. This spell had a lot of uses, and many wizards had made special modifications to this spell to create their own spell. It had many strange abilities, and tentacle spells were very effective against women. Sulen planned to improve this spell after he learned it. While Sulen was learning magic, caravans from the southern countries arrived at northern town. They brought all kinds of goods and large amounts of money. The merchants from the southern countries had formed a huge caravan. When Sulen came out to patrol, he saw many caravans carrying a lot of goods and slaves to trade in the market. The specialties of the southern countries were very popular in northern town city. For example, the dried seafood of the southern countries, such as the dried seafood from the Lonstal archipelago, tasted very good after being cooked. Being able to eat seafood thousands of kilometers inland from the ocean, although it was dried seafood, it was still a good enjoyment. Of course, these caravans also had some fresh seafood, but it was very expensive. This was the result of wizard spells. After hundreds of years of development, the use of spells to keep food fresh had been perfected. As long as you were willing to pay, you could even taste the rainbow lobster from the Rainbow Sea. In addition to all kinds of dried seafood, Sulen also ordered some seaweed, shrimp, and kelp. There was no MSG in this world, and Sulen didn't know how to make it. However, he remembered that the earliest MSG was found and extracted from kelp. Although there was no MSG now, seaweed, and other dried seafood could replace some of the taste of MSG, sir. The manager of the caravan under northern town city, Jean, ran over and said, "I've counted. The southern country sent a total of 21 caravans, and they are all ready to participate in the slave auction." Okay. Sulen nodded slightly. He was very satisfied with this situation. For an auction, the more people there were, the higher the final price. The 8,000 orc slaves in northern town city were ready to be auctioned. Rumble. A loud noise came from the city wall, and it immediately attracted the attention of many people. As for those who lived here often, they seemed to be used to this noise. In the distance, a 10-meter-tall section of the city wall suddenly collapsed. Smoke and dust filled the air, and then a tall figure walked out of the smoke. It was a huge steel golem. At the same time, some stone golems and clay golems appeared in the surrounding sea. These golems were about 3 meters tall. At this time, they were working on the construction site. These golems were violently blasting large amounts of heavy stones or severely damaged city walls. They were now responsible for a lot of labor in the territory. Bang! A muffled sound rang out as the steel golem arrived near the city walls and vigorously pounded on the city walls. Cracks appeared on the already shaky city walls, and as the steel golem attacked, large amounts of rocks fell from the city walls, causing that section of the city walls to become even more shaky. Boom! Finally, under the continuous bombardment of the steel golems, this section of the wall collapsed with a loud bang. After the wall collapsed, it was then smashed into smaller pieces by the golems next to it and sent to the side to be piled up. A dozen or so puppet golems pushed forward like a large road roller, pushing down the wall that needed to be rebuilt. The clay golems' bodies were slightly deformed. Like bulldozers, they quickly flattened the land. The people who entered Northern Town City saw these powerful machines at first glance. Many people looked at these puppet golems in shock. In this world where productivity was still in the middle world, most places were still in the primitive stage of accumulating power. Suddenly seeing such powerful golems, they wanted to talk about the difference between the Industrial Revolution and the feudal era. Because the elemental pool could be charged, the golems in Northern Town City didn't cost much to work. The elemental pool provided sufficient and efficient energy. Although many puppet golems didn't look like professional construction golems, but were combat golems, the efficiency of these golems was still unsurpassed by humans. After these golems flattened the broken city walls, they dug up the foundation again. Stones that required more than a dozen people to move were easily lifted by the steel golems. Moreover, they moved very quickly. All the golems had a clear division of labor. The production efficiency of these golems was much higher than that of excavators and cranes. After all, these golems were unmanned. As long as they were given a job, they would complete it with quality and quantity. With the help of these golems, Northern Town City was already in a semi-mechanized state. He was very satisfied with these golems now, and he already planned to build a golem factory. The construction of a golem factory was very difficult. There were many problems involved. Many steps required the assistance of the tower genie, or control. The energy of the golem factory came from the elements, and it could be forcibly controlled through the energy of the elemental pool. The energy of the elemental pool could be modified with some energy supply techniques, and it could be used as electricity just like in his previous life. Of course, if he wanted to build a golem factory, he also needed to have enough soul crystals. Each set of golems needed a corresponding soul crystal. The clay golems could be made with only mid-tier soul crystals. The rock golems, obsidian golems, and steel golems could be made with high-tier soul crystals. The legendary golems needed to be made with legendary soul crystals. Soul crystals weren't something that could be found in the main plane. Many years later, in the multiverse, soul crystals were a kind of currency. Under normal circumstances, the Grim Reaper kept the souls in the multiverse from being excessively plundered. It was his duty to decide where the souls would go. However, there were too many souls in the multiverse. In order to obtain soul power, many magic schools had learned spells that were specifically used to obtain soul power. For example, the soul binding spell could imprison a soul in a crystal, which was a soul crystal. The fundamental reason why golems could possess some simple artificial intelligence was because of the soul crystals. There were still some biological instincts left in the soul crystals. Some of the high-level golems were even stronger than legendary-grade golems. The auction in Northern Town City was about to begin. 8,000 monster slaves were already a huge fortune for the merchant groups that came to purchase them. Many merchants wanted to buy some of them back. Su Luan handed over the auction to Jean and then went back to continue to practice magic. Whoosh! Suddenly, there was a noise from Sullen's residence. Then, Su Len stood up excitedly. However, unlike before, there was a gray tentacle in his hand. The tentacle was more than 3 meters long, and these tentacles were as flexible as snakes. The tentacle swung back and forth, making various movements under Sullen's command. The tentacle rushed out quickly and directly wrapped around the target used for the experiment. Then, with a slight force, there was a cracking sound, and deep marks were left on the wooden board. Shadow Tentacle. After spending so much time, Sulen finally recorded this spell. Whoosh! Sulen took a deep breath and looked around. Then, he chanted a spell. After a while, a black tentacle appeared and wrapped around a barbarian warrior in an instant. Then, he began to test the binding strength and various effects of this spell. As an energy tentacle, the shadow tentacle was very flexible and had almost no weaknesses. After trapping the barbarian warrior, the barbarian took a long time to break free. If he waited a little longer, his strength would start to decline, and it would not be easy to break free. Chapter 353. Enduring the PDA attack, I still wrote a chapter. Please subscribe. After spending a lot of effort, the barbarian finally broke free from the shadow tentacles. The whole process took almost a minute, and he had to go berserk in the end. Bang bang bang. Sulen summoned the shadow tentacles again. This time, Sulen didn't use them to tie people up. Instead, he tried to use them to attack. The 3-meter-long shadow tentacle was like a flexible whip, and it quickly attacked the targets around him. As the tentacles danced in the air, they brought with them a sharp gust of wind. When they hit the wooden targets, wooden chips flew everywhere. Very soon, deep marks were left on the wooden targets. Although the power of the tentacles was average, it was still quite good as a control skill. After becoming an advanced wizard, Sulen could learn a lot more spells. Another important thing was that he could teleport. In fact, it was just a flash. He could use it in battle. Sulen had already mastered the long-distance teleportation spell, but he had just started to learn this flash spell. After mastering this spell, Sullen's fighting style had changed a lot. Many dangerous attacks could be easily dodged with his sixth sense. Of course, he also had to be careful not to give others a chance to cast Dimensional Anchor. The function of Dimensional Anchor was very simple. After being targeted by Dimensional Anchor, you couldn't use dimensional teleportation for a while. Also, this spell was much easier to learn than teleportation. It only required an intermediate wizard to learn it. Of course, the effectiveness of this spell depended on the difference in level between the caster and the target. If the target was a legendary wizard and you were only an elite wizard, even if you cast 10 dimensional anchors, it would still be useless. The reconstruction of the northern city was in full swing. At the same time, in the newly built auction house, 8,000 orcs, gnolls, and trolls were also being auctioned. The caravans from the southern coastal countries were very interested in these orc slaves. Sulen set them in groups of 20, and the price for each group was 200 kinnar. In fact, this price was on the low side. However, there were more than 20 companies bidding for the slaves. The average price of these slaves was 500 kinnar per group. 40 groups of slaves brought northern town city more than 20,000 kinnar in total. Sulen didn't keep the 20,000 kinnar banknotes. He used it to buy all kinds of resources. North Town's population had skyrocketed. Other than food and ironware, there was a shortage of other resources. Sulen had built a lot of workshops in his territory, but it was impossible for him to be self-sufficient in a short time. Sullen's main focus now was on military and food. As for spices, sugar, and wine, these industries didn't need many people. There were quite a number of people working in the textile workshops in the territory. However, they only produced high-grade fine linen, cotton, and a small amount of silk. These were supplied to the Liege's mansion, Hathaway, and Karina. The excess would be sold. As for the coarse flax used by commoners, it wasn't for sale. Sulen planned to gather some women and build a textile workshop to produce coarse linen. After all, cloth was very important. He couldn't always rely on merchants to buy it. There were also a lot of daily necessities that Sulen planned to produce in his territory. North Town City was 300 miles away from the nearest city. If all the goods were transported from the Kingdom of Florence, the price of the cheapest goods would be more than double. The traveling merchants in this era weren't as developed as in his previous life. If they didn't make 2 or 3 times the profit, they wouldn't bring goods back. Therefore, Sulen had his caravans purchase all the goods from the outside world every month. Of course, some of them were brought back by other caravans. Most of the people in North Town City were serfs and refugees. Their purchasing power was limited. Sulen couldn't sell them at a high price. He couldn't even sell them at cost price. Therefore, not only did he not make money, he even lost money. However, he had to do this business. It was related to the people's livelihood. If Sulen wanted to build a country, he had to do it even if he had to lose money. Of course, this was only temporary. When all kinds of small workshops were opened in the future, the basic necessities could be met locally. By then, Sulen wouldn't have to spend money every month. These necessities didn't seem like much, but to the commoners, it was related to their livelihood. Let alone North Town City, even in Cult City, if the price of food increased by 30%, the commoners would be forced to sell themselves as slaves. If the price was higher, even the commoners wouldn't be able to withstand it. Many merchants, nobles, and tycoons would take advantage of natural disasters to stock up on their goods. They would artificially raise the price of food, turning the commoners into proletarians or even slaves. Sulen was so busy that his head was spinning. He wanted to go out for a walk. He rode on a horse and followed the caravan to Calent City to purchase some goods. To his surprise, he was robbed not long after he left North Town City. The robbers were a group of northern barbarian bandits. The patrols of North Town City were only responsible for maintaining the safety of the territory. Therefore, after leaving North Town City, everything would return to normal. The northern barbarians Sulen encountered were one of them. The northern barbarians were very similar to the barbarians in North Town City. The northern barbarians were just a general term. The barbarians had their own names. Even the barbarians themselves didn't know how many tribes there were in the northern wastelands. There were many barbarian tribes living in the northern wastelands. The barbarian tribes were known for their thick body hair. They were tall and brave, but lacked discipline. They liked to solve problems with brute force. They were born with a weak resistance to the cold. Similarly, the northern barbarian women were tall and big. However, their skin was fair but a little rough. Their facial features were also quite delicate. They were similar to the warriors of his previous life. The northern barbarians' brains were always cramped. They liked to drink and fight. Their bad temper and stubbornness were comparable to the dwarves. The group that robbed Sulen was obviously a small barbarian tribe in the northern wastelands. It was already winter in the northern wastelands, but there were still some barbarians with bare arms. Only these people had high resistance to the cold. Normal people would have frozen to death if they dared to do so. Sulen found that the northern barbarians had a wolf's head tattooed on their chests. This should be the totem they believed in. Many of the northern barbarians had shamans. Some of them believed in nature, while others believed in their ancestors. The reason why the northern barbarians were so scattered was because of their own beliefs. After blocking the way, the northern barbarians let out a strange roar. After seeing the robbers, a leader immediately ran over to Sulen to report. Sulen looked at the robbers in the distance and ordered, "Lure them here." It would be a waste to reject the slaves that were delivered to his doorstep. These northern barbarians were very useful whether they were slaves or soldiers. He could capture them and throw them to Boulder or Johnson for training. No matter how rebellious they were, they would be beaten into obedience. Although they were stubborn, they were not idiots. The guards in the caravan this time were all elites. All of them were veterans who had been on the battlefield. After hearing Sullen's order, they immediately understood his intention. Then, they smiled and ordered their men to take action. The caravan directly turned around and pretended to be panicked, trying to escape to the territory of Northern Town City. At the same time, in order to prevent these people from catching up, the caravan deliberately slowed down a little, giving the robbers a feeling that they could easily catch up with them. As expected, these robbers acted as if they were acting. They were completely acting according to the script. When a bearded bandit leader with a bare chest and an unknown animal skin on his body saw that the caravan was about to escape, he immediately shouted to his men, "They want to escape. Hurry up and catch up with them. Their carriages are slow. They must have a lot of goods. We're going to be rich this time. Get ready to surround them. This time, we have to take all of them. Don't let any of them escape." The robbers who robbed on the trade route in Northern Town naturally knew about the specialties of Northern Town City. After seeing that the caravan was slow, they immediately realized that there was probably alcohol and sugar in it. The guards of the caravan under Sullen's command had traveled this trade route many times. Naturally, they knew what the robbers were after. The other orcs and gnolls wanted food and weapons, but these northern barbarians preferred strong alcohol. However, these robbers would never have thought that they were not targeting a little rabbit this time, but a big crocodile hiding under the water. Waves of shouts and howls came closer and closer. The northern barbarians in front of them rushed up excitedly. From time to time, some of them roared like war cries. Their faces were full of excitement because they realized that there were not many people in the caravan. When they could see the other party clearly, these robbers sped up and rushed up. "Let's begin." Sulen, who had been sitting in the carriage and watching the show, waved his hand. Then, the guards of the caravan instantly removed their disguises and took off their cloaks, revealing their excellent equipment and weapons. The bandits were very sensitive to the changes in their enemies. As soon as the group of bandits approached, they immediately realized that the situation was not good. The merchants in front of them were not afraid at all. In fact, many of them even had expressions of eagerness in their eyes. Many of the guards with scars on their faces were excitedly cleaning their weapons. They looked at the robbers as if they were looking at a group of sheep that had been sent to their doorstep. Hee. A bald barbarian warrior carrying a battle axe of more than 50 kilograms rushed up. He was the captain of Sullen's guards. He shouted excitedly, "Guys, it's time to work. Show them our names. Let them die with some understanding." The guards who had removed their disguises quickly cut down the robbers who rushed up to the robbers. Behind them, a flag was raised in the caravan. It was the battle flag of Northern Town City. Chapter 354. Bang! The northern barbarian bandits that charged at them were immediately knocked down. Then, a battle flag was raised in the middle of the caravan. There was a shield and a strange spear on the flag, and a fierce ice Quetzalcoatlus on the shield. It was the flag of the northern citadel. After seeing this flag, there seemed to be some commotion among the remaining bandits. It was obvious that someone had recognized this flag. It's the Orc Slayers. They're the caravan of the northern citadel. Suddenly, there was a cry of surprise among the bandits. The northern citadel's reputation in the northern wastelands could be said to have repelled all evil. After discovering that the caravan was from the northern citadel, the northern citadel soldiers seemed to be frightened. Seeing these bandits make such an obvious mistake, the soldiers of the northern citadel would not miss this opportunity. Taking advantage of this opportunity, they rushed up. Sulen didn't even need to fight. The soldiers under his command just charged and scattered the bandits. Then, they were defeated. Many bandits even threw down their weapons and chose to surrender. Of course, there were also some bandits who wanted to fight to the end. In the end, they were killed by hand axes and javelins. The whole battle lasted for a long time. It didn't take more than half an hour from the beginning to the end. These northern barbarian bandits, who had more than 200 bandits, were completely defeated. Except for a few dozen who died, most of the rest were taken captive. Some even ran away as fast as they could. Take them to the interrogation room. Su Len waved his hand and let 2 drows in to interrogate the captives. I want to know how these bandits targeted us, and where is their nest. The rest of you, clean up the battlefield, collect the spoils, and repair the damaged carriages. Yes, sir, the barbarian captain said respectfully, then began to order the others to clean up the battlefield. These northern barbarian bandits' equipment was average. Their weapons could only be reforged, and they didn't have any decent armor. Their fur was not bad, but it looked too dirty. The corpses also needed to be buried. In addition, these captives also needed to be escorted back. The drow's interrogation was very efficient. A few screams came from the captives from time to time. After about a few minutes, the 2 drows in charge of the interrogation ran over and whispered a few words in Sullen's ear. Sullen's eyes lit up and he said, "Their tribe is nearby? Are you sure he's not lying?" The drow standing next to him patted his chest and promised, "Sir, with our interrogation skills, do you think these simple-minded guys can fool us?" I interrogated the 5 captives separately, and their answers were all the same. These northern barbarians are heading south. It is said that they are avoiding the frost giants. Frost giants? Su Len said in surprise. The frost giants are heading south? Frost giants were a type of pure-blooded giant. According to the records of the wizards, there were 6 types of pure-blooded giants living in this material plane. They were cloud giants, frost giants, mountain giants, fire giants, stone giants, and storm giants. These giants had their own sequence. The highest level was the storm giant, the lowest was the mountain giant, and then there were their relatives, such as the ogres, 2-headed giants, swamp giants, and many other hybrid giants and subspecies. The giant species had a strict hierarchy. The lowest-ranking giants in the higher-ranking branches were higher than the highest-ranking giants in the lower-ranking branches. For example, the chief of the mountain giant tribe was often not as noble as an ordinary stone giant. The frost giants were a race living in the northern tundra. They had always claimed that the roof of the world, the northern tundra, was their private territory, but this statement was not recognized by other races. North of the northern wastelands was the ice plains, also known as the northern ice plains. As one continued north, the terrain would gradually rise. The entire northern wastelands was a cold, rugged, and sparsely populated region. There were snow-covered mountain ranges, rocky hills, dense forests, and misty valleys. This place was dotted with isolated fortresses, ancient tombs, and many ruins of lost empires. To the west of the northern region was the Golden Desert, which was the territory of the Desert Kingdom. To the east was the sea, to the south was the northern wilderness, and the north extended to the endless sea. In the northern tundra, there were only a few small human towns scattered in the valleys. On the other hand, the frost giants were spread out in tribes on the northern ice plains. A frost giant tribe usually had 30 to 50 frost giants, 20 to 30 ogres, an instructor, 30 winter wolves, and 1 or 2 young white dragons. When it came to frost giants, the white dragons of the pentashade dragons had to be mentioned. As the weakest of the pentashade dragons, not only did they have the lowest intelligence, but they were also the smallest. However, although the white dragons were the weakest among the pentashade dragons, they were the most numerous. Red dragons and blue dragons usually had 3 eggs in a nest, while white dragons had 6 eggs, and their hatching rate was also the highest. According to this number, it would not take many years for white dragons to cover the entire northern tundra. Unfortunately, they still had to face the attacks of their nemesis, the frost giants. An adult white dragon could easily kill a frost giant, but frost giants usually like to sneak up on young white dragons. In a way, these frost giants maintain the ecological balance on the tundra. The frost giants usually hunted in groups. The main target of a large group of frost giants was usually the polar bear or the white dragon's nest. Even an adult white dragon could only run away when faced with a group of frost giants. They regarded hunting white dragons as the highest glory, and generally worshipped the Ice Queen Hermosid and the Storm Lord Talos. They were as fierce and aggressive as white dragons, and frost giants were not responsible for the food of their children. If they wanted to live, they could only hunt by themselves. Not only were they not responsible for food, but they also often robbed their children of their spoils of war. As a result, the frost giant children learned from them when they grew up. Cold, ruthless, selfish, aggressive, and tyrannical, these were the fine traditions of their tribe, and they were the most difficult hunters in the northern tundra. Frost giants would hunt powerful beasts or white dragons, and they would offer these sacrifices to the Storm Lord Talos. If they were lucky enough and the sacrifice satisfied the Storm Lord, they might be able to receive the Storm Lord's grace and become a storm warrior or priest. Now that these bandits said that there were frost giants coming south, Sulen was a little vigilant. Frost giants were not orcs. Adult frost giants were tier 4, and the frost giant chieftain had reached tier 5, the legendary level. Although the lowest was level 21, some of the stronger ones could reach level 22 or level 23, and the frost giant king was at least level 26. "Sir, is that tribe?" the drow next to him asked. "Of course, we have to capture them. It's better to have them as a family, right?" Sulen said matter-of-factly. Since they had discovered a northern barbarian tribe, and this tribe had attacked them before, no matter what, Sulen did not intend to let this tribe go. "Leave some people to look after these captives. The rest of you, follow me," Sulen said as he stood up. The information that the drows got from torture was very complete. The location of this northern tribe was not far from here, and the group took about 2 hours to reach the vicinity of the tribe. From the outside, this was a barbarian tribe of about 500 people. The tribe was a little dilapidated. Some of them were tents, and some of them were wooden houses. Judging from the age of the wooden houses, this tribe had not migrated here for a long time, no more than 2 months. At this time, some of the tribe had gone hunting, while others had become bandits and were wiped out by the army of the northern city. Now, there were not many people in the camp. Seeing this situation, Sulen was about to order an attack, but at this time, there was a clamor. At the back of the tribe, a group of tall humanoid creatures was attacking the tribe's camp. Upon closer look, they had rock-like faces, and sharp teeth were exposed at the corners of their cracked mouths. They looked particularly ferocious. Under their light blue skin were majestic muscles, and on top of them were bulging blood vessels. Obviously, they contained a lot of power. These humanoid creatures were in groups of 7 or 8, and they were attacking the barbarian tribes separately. Their bodies were wrapped in simple and crude fur coats, and their chests were full of scars. These people were walking as if they were flying, and their huge long-handled axes and warhammers looked ferocious and terrifying. The leader was wearing a black cow-horned helmet, and he was surrounded by a terrifying aura. Obviously, they were not human. Although it was the first time Sulen had seen this kind of creature, he could instantly tell that this was a group of frost giants. What are the frost giants doing here? Sulen muttered to himself as he looked at the frost giants who easily overturned the northern barbarian tribe like a hot knife through butter. "Sir, should we continue?" a barbarian warrior beside him asked in a low voice. Sulen did not speak. There were 30 frost giants in this group, and the leader was a legendary. The warriors beside Sulen were at most grade 3, and even the most common frost giant was 1 grade higher than them. If they fought, even if they killed these frost giants, the result would be a Pyrrhic victory. Su Len was confident that he could deal with the Frost Giant chief, but the common Frost Giants would very likely cause heavy damage to the army of the northern battlefront city when he fought with the Frost Giant chief. Let's wait first. Su Len shook his head and waved at the messenger. He took out a token and asked him to send a message to the northern battlefront city. The barbarian tribe that had lost a lot of combat power could not resist the attack of the Frost Giants at all. Soon, the tribe was occupied by the Frost Giants. The Frost Giants did not seem to have any intention of leaving. Instead, they took over the tribe and occupied it. Seeing this situation, Su Len left 2 smart soldiers to monitor the situation, and returned to the caravan with the rest of the people. Chapter 355. The meat in my mouth was stolen. Su Len was in a bad mood. He looked back at the barbarian tribe and left. He had already decided to leave the Frost Giants behind. As for living in harmony with the Frost Giants, it was impossible. The Frost Giants were arrogant, cruel, and greedy. When they knew there was a human town nearby, their first thought was to rob it. As Frost Giants of the evil faction, they didn't know what a win-win situation was. Perhaps in their mind, a win-win situation meant that they won twice. Su Luen wanted to figure out the reason why these Frost Giants had come to the south. A Frost Giant tribe like this was a threat to the North Town, so there was no room for others to sleep on. A legendary powerhouse could drop a lot of good things, such as legendary skill points and platinum treasure chests. After returning to the caravan, they found a place to set up camp. It was getting late, so they started cooking and waiting for the army of the northern wastelands to arrive. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye, it was the next morning. After breakfast, Su Luen saw Hathaway and Alex arrive at the camp with the troops that had been assembled overnight. The 2 brought barbarian warriors, harpies, 2 teams of half-elf archers, and 2 teams of centaurs. Although there weren't many people, it was half of the northern wastelands fighting force. They also brought some powerful weapons, 30 ballistae. It was difficult for the ballistae to hit normal people, but it was much easier for the Frost Giants. If the ballistae were used as a trump card on the battlefield, the Frost Giants would definitely suffer. Su Len had been keeping an eye on the Frost Giants. At the same time, he told the army to rest as soon as possible. They had to be patient when facing this Frost Giant tribe. Although the Frost Giants weren't the most powerful giants, they were second only to the Storm Giants. An adult Frost Giant had around 29 points of strength and 21 points of constitution. Although they didn't have any magic abilities, they were still powerful enough. They were also immune to ice magic and had strong vitality. They wielded heavy weapons like killing machines. They were very difficult to deal with. Of course, they were not without weaknesses. Frost Giants were afraid of fire, and fire could deal 150% damage to them. In the past, some adventurers thought that they could easily kill the Frost Giants after knowing their weaknesses. But when they really did it, they realized that even if they knew the weaknesses of the Frost Giants, it was still very dangerous to kill them. Although the challenge level of Frost Giants was LV13, this was only in theory because Frost Giants usually lived in groups. Additionally, when facing a Frost Giant, one should never face its attack head-on. Even a rank 3 knight wearing a knight's plate armor would be blown away by a Frost Giant's full-strength strike. Fortunately, Frost Giants were not very agile due to their huge size, which gave the others a chance to dodge. The Frost Giants had a period of chaos. To be specific, all the giants had a period of chaos. At that time, all the giants attacked other races as if they had gone mad. Even the giant races often had conflicts with each other. Moreover, the giants of the lower order actually dared to attack the giants of the upper order. This was simply something that had never happened before. But it really happened. At that time, giants could be said to be the public enemy of the continent. All other races were hostile to them. As long as they were found, they would attack them. This situation lasted for a long time, and the number of giants on the continent decreased by about 40%. Then, after that, the giants stopped and returned to their original state. It was said that this was because the giant god Anan cancelled the order among the giants. He announced that the giants would be ranked by themselves through competition. In this way, those lower-ranked giants actually wanted to be promoted, and the original giants were also trying to preserve their status. However, it was said that this action failed in the end. The dragons didn't want to see their enemies become stronger. After a day of rest, the army of the northern battlefront city began to move in the evening. The sentries arranged to monitor the frost giant camp would send messages every half an hour. Although Su Len didn't go to the scene in person, he knew the situation of the frost giant camp very well. "Sir, the frost giants still have no intention of leaving today. They seem to be using this place as a temporary camp." A scout reported to Su Len. "Moreover, at noon, I saw more than 20 ogres come here. It seems that these frost giants really migrated here. They plan to live here permanently." Hearing the scout's words, Su Len said with some surprise. Frost giants like cold areas. Although the northern wilderness is cold in winter, it is still hot in summer. These frost giants are definitely not used to it. But why would they violate their living habits and come here? Forget it, don't think so much. Since they dare to come here, they might as well stay. The wall of my castle still lacks a head like this as a trophy. Time passed by minute, and soon night came. After a day of rest, the soldiers of the northern battlefront city were full of energy. They were all ready to do something big. Su Len didn't hesitate. After a simple dinner, he led the army directly to the frost giant camp. About 3 hours later, they arrived at the periphery of the camp. The camp had changed a lot. The houses in the camp were built taller. Although the northern barbarians were tall, about 2 meters tall, their houses were naturally not suitable for the frost giants, who were 4 meters tall and weighed more than 1.5 tons. Therefore, during the day, the frost giants let the captives cut down trees and then came back to build houses and camps. When they were 5 kilometers away from the camp, Su Len stopped the army and then asked Hathaway to summon a few wizard's eyes to investigate the camp. After summoning a few wizard's eyes, they quickly hid in the darkness. The wizard's eyes soon flew over the camp. Hathaway snapped her fingers and tapped her finger lightly. Suddenly, there was a ripple in the air in front of her. The next second, a circular image with a diameter of 20 centimeters appeared. After combining the water mirror with the wizard's eyes, the water mirror could project the image seen by the wizard's eyes on the crystal. It was like watching a movie, and the situation of the entire frost giant tribe could be clearly seen. 25 ogres and 22 winter wolves. After seeing the image of the water mirror, Su Len quickly got a lot of information. Fortunately, we didn't attack directly. Otherwise, this sneak attack would definitely have been discovered. Su Len frowned and looked at the group of winter wolves. Frost giants and winter wolves often cooperated. Creatures like winter wolves knew the giant language and the common language, so they could communicate with the frost giants simply. These winter wolves had a good sense of smell, good hearing, and night vision. They were good helpers in hunting. Frost giants often brought winter wolves to hunt. If Su Len had led the army to attack just now, he might have been discovered by the frost giants before he even got close to the camp. Then, the sneak attack would have turned into a direct attack. Many people thought that the frost giants would fight you head-on, but in fact, the frost giants were very cunning creatures. After they hunted white dragons, if there were white dragon fledglings, they would not kill them directly. Instead, they would tame the white dragon fledglings and let the white dragon help them hunt. Of course, the frost giants preferred to use dragon beasts because the real white dragons had the inherited memory of the dragon. In the face of such a situation, they would pretend to be tamed until they grew into young dragons or adult dragons. Then, they would suddenly attack. Later on, the frost giants also learned to be smart. They would kill the white dragon in advance before it became a young dragon. Many people thought that the frost giants were very stupid and thought that they only knew how to fight head-on. In fact, they liked to ambush and often sneak attacks when the white dragon was asleep. If they found that they were being attacked by humans, they would immediately counterattack. Of course, many times, they would set a trap for humans to fall into and then attack. As a melee profession, when facing the attacks of the frost giants, it was best to dodge as much as possible. Don't think about blocking the attacks of the frost giants. People who did that basically paid an extremely heavy price. When the frost giants were fighting, once they found that things were not going well, they would immediately retreat and escape. "Move the ballista over," Sulen said. Soon, some barbarian warriors moved the ballista that had been dismantled into parts. It was difficult to move the ballista, so under normal circumstances, it was dismantled when it was moved and assembled when it reached the place. After arriving at the periphery of the camp, Sulen began to let the soldiers reassemble the ballista. The arrows used by the ballista were 3-meter-long spears, and the spearheads of the spears had been modified. There were blood grooves on both sides of the spearheads. As long as the arrows hit the enemy, even if it was not a vital point, it would take half of their life. If they were unlucky, they would even bleed to death. In addition to these spears, there were also some spears that were linked with chains. These were all thrown spears. They were all used by the barbarian warriors. The throwing spears were short and small and carried a heavy chain ball. As long as they hit the target, they would restrict the target's movement. Even if it was as strong as the frost giants, if they were hit by 2 or 3 spears, they would basically lose their ability to move and could only be exhausted to death by others. All barbarian warriors, each carry 3 spears. "When you attack, add the chain ball at the back," Sulen said as he held the spears. "You don't need to kill in one hit, just hit the target." Chapter 356. Mass Invisibility. Mass Bull Strength. Mass Bear's Endurance. Mass Haste. Raise your spirits. Vanish. The light of spells kept flashing. Soon, the soldiers of North Town City were buffed with 7 or 8 different buffs. The combat strength of these soldiers almost doubled in a short period of time. The ballistas were also reassembled. At the same time, the arrows and heavy javelins were distributed to the barbarians. The javelins shone with a cold light and had obvious barbs. They looked like the javelins used to catch large fish in the previous world. Even the frost giants could not withstand such weapons. Next, Sulen led the northern fortress city army closer to the camp. Maybe the frost giants were too confident, or maybe the sentries were too lazy, but they did not see any sentries outside the camp. "Hide and wait." Sulen gestured to the soldiers behind him and said in a deep voice, "You guys stay here. I will lure the frost giants out first. Then, all the ballistas will find an opportunity to shoot. After that, it will be your turn to shoot. The enemy this time is not goblins or kobolds. Don't blame me for not warning you if you accidentally die. Don't worry, boss. We will be careful." Johnson patted his chest and said, "I hope so." Sullen's figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. He looked around and found his way to a fence outside the camp. Whether it was the barbarians or the frost giants, the fences were very rough. Sulen easily went over the fence. After entering the camp, the first thing Sulen smelled was a foul stench. There were some human and animal corpses on the ground. Although the frost giants did not eat humans, the ogres did not. These should be the corpses of the northern barbarians that were captured earlier. Looking at the marks, it was most likely done by the ogres. Sulen took out kerosene from his storage space and poured it all over the camp. Although he was very careful, it still made some noise. Before they could react, a fireball fell from the sky. Boom! A loud noise instantly broke the silence of the night. The camp, which had fallen into a deep slumber, immediately exploded like boiling water. Ah! An angry roar rang out. The frost giant endured the pain and rushed out of the house, shouting angrily, "Despicable sneak attacker! I'm going to crush all your bones!" Boom! The flames burned quickly along with the kerosene, igniting several tents and wooden houses within a few breaths. Many frost giants rushed out. Sulan did not delay. After igniting the camp, he immediately fled. The angry frost giants and ogres followed closely behind. Just as Sulan rushed out of the camp, a few black shadows suddenly rushed out from the dark corners. Sulan only saw a few black shadows in front of him, and his body subconsciously dodged. Then, he took the opportunity to kick the black shadow away. At this time, he saw clearly that it was a winter wolf about 2 meters long. The winter wolf that was kicked by Suluan rolled several times on the ground in a row, and its body went limp. Although Suluan did not attack with all his strength, even so, it was not something a winter wolf could bear. Its ribs were directly broken, and it seemed that it would die soon. When the other winter wolves saw this situation, they stopped instantly and looked at Sulan with vigilance. Frost breath. 5 cold breaths suddenly came out of the winter wolves' mouths. Under the bone-chilling breaths, the ground quickly froze into ice at a speed visible to the naked eye. Soon, a layer of smooth ice appeared on the ground. The power of the winter wolf's ice breath was average. Not to mention the white dragon, it couldn't even compare to the ice-winged dragon's breath. The winter wolf's ice breath wasn't enough to freeze the enemy. It could only make the enemy's body stiff and slow down their reaction speed. Sulan accelerated and directly rushed out of the attack range of the frost breath. With cold resistance and elemental resistance, this level of frost breath could not affect him at all. Without the obstruction, Sulan's footsteps were light, and after a few flashes, he rushed out of the camp. The frost giants behind him were furious. They waved their heavy giant axes and directly cut down the fence of the camp. After seeing Sulan's figure, they rushed up without thinking. Damn sneak attacker! Don't run! Obviously, Sulan's act of setting fire to the camp had completely angered these frost giants. Boom! A dull noise came, and a boulder flew out from Sulan's side and hit the ground next to him. Sulan did not slow down and passed by it in an instant. The dexterity of the frost giants was not high. An adult frost giant only had 9 points, which was a little more than ordinary people. Because of their huge size, they could rarely dodge the enemy's attacks. However, this did not mean that their movement speed was slow. In fact, because of their large size, one step of theirs was equivalent to several steps of ordinary people. If they encountered some short rogues, one step of the frost giant might be equivalent to 5 or 6 steps. Especially for halfling rogues, they were very unfriendly. 30 frost giants and 20 ogres rushed out of the camp and chased after Sulan. The distance of a few hundred meters was covered in a few breaths. After Sulan rushed to the predetermined ambush position, he immediately shouted, "Attack!" Then his figure flashed, and he accelerated forward. Bang! 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 The sound of bowstrings was constantly heard. The invisible North Town army instantly launched an attack. 3-meter-long crossbow bolts were shot out. The bolts flew through the air and hit the frost giants' bodies. Some of the bolts were directly blocked by the frost giants with their giant weapons, and some were dodged. Only less than 1/3 of the bolts hit their targets. The frost giants that were hit by the bolts were directly pushed back by the bolts. The sharp spears pierced their tough skin and muscles, and blood gushed out. Such a serious injury would be fatal for ordinary people, but it was not even a serious injury for the frost giants. After being ambushed, the frost giants immediately realized that this was a trap. However, they didn't panic. Instead, they roared and ran over in large strides. For them, the humans were no match for them at all. As long as they rushed up, they could kill a few with a swing of their axes. After the ballistae were fired, the two barbarian warriors quickly loaded the ballistae and fired. The whole process only took 20 seconds. Bolts were fired one after another. The frost giants were prepared and dodged most of the bolts. Only a few that were too close to dodge were hit. Javelins. Su Len instantly threw out a heavy javelin, and the barbarian warriors around him followed. Throw. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Hundreds of javelins flashed with cold light as they flew out from the North Town army. Sharp whistling sounds were heard, followed by painful roars. The frost giants were severely injured. Bang! Rocks the size of footballs flew over quickly. Su Len waved his halberd and sent the rocks flying. However, the other barbarians were not so lucky. A few of them could not dodge in time and were sent flying far away. If not for their strength and thick skin, they would have lost their lives. After 2 consecutive waves of javelins, the frost giants were severely injured. A few of them died, and almost all the frost giants were injured. The ogres following them also suffered heavy losses. Cursed roared furiously, his eyes turning blood red. He waved his hands and threw the rocks around him, then charged forward with his giant axe. The frost giant tribe had suffered such great losses. As the chief of the frost giants, Cursed could not wait to kill all the humans in front of him. The charging speed of the legendary frost giants was very fast. Their huge size and ferocious aura shocked some of the soldiers, causing them to stand there in a daze. Although the frost giants did not have dragon's might, their violent aura was not much weaker than that. Not everyone had the courage to face such a behemoth. However, after seeing the frost giants charging up, many of the barbarian warriors were eager to give it a try. Idiot! Dodge quickly! Seeing this situation, Su Len immediately shouted. Su Len had a clear understanding of the frost giant's strength. The force of their full power attack was several tons. Although the barbarian warriors were quite strong, they had no way of resisting against such overwhelming strength. A cruel and bloodthirsty expression flashed across the enraged frost giant chief's face. He hated these humans to the core. He attacked with all his might, swinging his giant battle axe. The frost giant chief's axe was close to 3 meters long, and its blade was close to 1 meter. This giant weapon weighed at least 500 jin, and its weight alone could easily crush a person to death. After seeing the enemy, he swung it down instantly. Swoosh! The gigantic axe swept across with a piercing sound of wind, followed by the sound of metal clashing. That barbarian warrior's two-handed axe, which was forged from fine iron, was broken. The frost giant Cursed gigantic axe swept across, and the well-made half-body armor was torn apart by this terrifying force. Blood splattered everywhere, and the barbarian warrior was sent flying back over 10 meters. With a boom, he smashed onto a crossbow cart, which was smashed into pieces. The others only took one look to see that the barbarian warrior's chest armor had been completely destroyed, and there was a hideous wound on his chest. His sternum was shattered, and his internal organs were also shattered. His entire chest seemed to have sunk in, and this tyrannical force had broken his spine. There was no need to look to know that this person was dead. With such serious injuries, unless he was a giant demon or an energy life form, it was impossible for him to survive. Damn it! Lightning flashed in Sullen's eyes, and in the next second, dazzling lightning exploded from his body. Lightning flashed, and Su Len appeared before Cursed in an instant, swinging the Tempest halberd in his hand. Boom! With a loud sound, the frost giant chief, who was about to go on a killing spree, felt an astonishing force coming from the battle axe in his hand, and his body retreated a few steps uncontrollably. Chapter 357. Su Len took 2 steps back to dissipate the force before pouncing forward again. At this moment, the frost giant chief raised his axe slightly, his body twisting slightly. The muscles on his arms bulged as if he was about to exert force. Su Len quickly shouted, "Dodge!" Whoosh! The axe cut through the air, bringing with it a sharp gust of wind. The huge 2-handed axe swept in a circle, and everything within 5 meters was under his attack. A barbarian warrior nearby heard the warning and rolled to the side to avoid the attack. The sharp gust of wind slashed across his face, and a trace of blood quietly slid down. Su Len dodged the attack with an iron bridge, and the storm war halberd in his hand stabbed out like a viper. Lightning flashed, and the barbarians all retreated. No one dared to approach the area where the two were fighting. The lesson from before made them understand that they didn't have much confidence in receiving an attack from the frost giant chief. Just as Su Len and the frost giant chief were fighting, the remaining frost giants and ogres rushed over. Chain of fireballs. Bursting flames. Slow. Flame burst. Hathaway, Alex, and the others made their moves. Fire spells were the best way to deal with them. These frost giants, who had just been baptized by arrows and javelins, suffered heavy losses, were hit by spells one after another. Flames exploded, and cries rang out continuously. As frost giants with negative fire resistance, fire spells made them wish they were dead. With the addition of slow and other spells to control the field, these frost giants couldn't gain the slightest advantage even though they were a level higher than the barbarians. Moreover, the barbarians outnumbered them by several times. Under the siege, these frost giants were forced to retreat again and again. The elven magic archers and centaur archers constantly harassed them with arrows. It was only a matter of time before these frost giants were killed. The ogres that had been following the frost giants couldn't resist at all. As grade 2 creatures, they were beheaded by the barbarians in a few exchanges. The winter wolves saw that the situation wasn't good and immediately ran away after a few of them were killed. The battle between Su Len and the frost giant chief was getting more and more intense. It was the first time that Su Len had fought with a giant like this. Only then did he realize that in a melee fight with such a large creature, the advantage of having a large body was just too great. Su Len was clearly much stronger than the frost giant chieftain, but in the face of the frost giant chieftain's attacks, he couldn't gain any advantage. In comparison, his weight was too light. Su Len's current weight was only 200 jin, but the frost giant chieftain's casual attack had the power of several thousand jin, enough to send him flying. As a result, although his strength was higher, his body involuntarily retreated. Once again, Su Len's body was pushed back by the recoil. He realized that this kind of head-on fight was not going to work. Compared to his own weight, the frost giant, which was more than 1.5 tons, had too much of an advantage. After thinking it through, Su Len immediately gave up on fighting the frost giant head-on and began to rely on his own agility to attack. After changing his fighting style, the battle situation changed significantly. Su Len turned his body and agilely dodged the frost giant's heavy blow. Then, he circled to the frost giant's back and stabbed with force. Ah! A dull roar sounded, and the sound contained great pain. The frost giant chieftain's tall body involuntarily twisted. Then, he exerted force under his feet and his body quickly rotated. Great cleave! The biting cold wind whistled past. Su Len rolled and dodged directly under the frost giant's feet. The storm war halberd left a bloody mark on his thigh. A wound of about 20 centimeters appeared, and blood gushed out. Su Len licked the blood that splashed on his lips, then spat lightly and rushed forward again. The frost giant chieftain's huge body made it very difficult for him to turn around. Although his huge body had many advantages, it also provided a lot of attacking positions, which also made it easier for Su Len to dodge his attacks. Swish! 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 Several flashes of lightning appeared in succession. Sulen stabbed the frost giant's body one after another. Blood splashed, and in a short time, the frost giant was covered in wounds. However, this kind of injury was not fatal to the frost giant. It was very difficult to kill the frost giant with this kind of bleeding. Lightning spear. Endless lightning gathered on the storm war halberd. The 3-meter-long storm war halberd fiercely pierced the frost giant's shoulder with a powerful force. Blood splattered, and the white bones inside seemed to be visible. Roar! The frost giant chieftain roared in pain. He felt endless anger towards Sulen's monkey-like attacks. The attack just now made him feel even more pain. He knew that if this continued, it would become more and more disadvantageous for him. The frost giant chieftain didn't care and used his arms to sweep around. Whirlwind slash. After seeing the frost giant's movements, Sulen dodged the moment the whirlwind slash was launched. Cleaving slash. A black light flashed, and the sharp blade flashed instantly. Sulen's body quickly rolled to avoid the attack, but he was still swept a little. After the frost giant chieftain forced Sulen away, he immediately waved his giant axe and chopped down. However, to the frost giant chieftain's disappointment, his attack didn't cause too much damage. Before the frost giant chieftain's attack fell on Sulen, the ring on his hand suddenly flashed, and an energy barrier instantly appeared in front of him. The frost giant chieftain's attack fell directly on the energy barrier. The energy barrier flickered a few times and finally blocked the attack. However, the energy barrier flickered a few times and then dimmed. The continuous fierce attacks made the wound on the frost giant chieftain's shoulder even bigger, and blood instantly gushed out. This also made the frost giant chieftain show an obvious flaw. The severe pain from his shoulder made the frost giant's movements stiff. Sulen's eyes flashed with lightning. In the next second, his body quickly rushed forward. The storm war halberd in his hand flashed with endless lightning power and directly pierced the frost giant's eyes. The frost giant's continuous attacks caused the wound on his shoulder to tear, and his body had a short period of stiffness. Although the time was very short, Sulen still seized this opportunity. 1 second, no, it should be half a second. Half a second was just the blink of an eye. But for Sulen, it was enough. Boom! Sulen's figure was like a phantom. He appeared in front of the frost giant in an instant. He leaped high, and the storm halberd instantly pierced the eyes of the frost giant chief. The sharp edge of the halberd could easily pierce through the defense of the plate armor. The frost giant's eyes naturally could not withstand it. The powerful force abruptly pierced through the frost giant's eyes, and the more than 30 centimeters of the halberd completely sank into it. The eyes were originally very fragile, and being pierced by the storm war halberd was even more painful. Sulen's choice of angle was also very tricky. The 30-centimeter blade pierced through the frost giant chieftain's eye and pierced the frost giant chieftain's brain. Powerful lightning power instantly erupted from the storm war halberd. How fragile was the brain? Even a legendary frost giant would die if its brain was damaged. The severe pain made the frost giant abnormally crazy. After Sulen stabbed it, there was a flash of light. In the next second, his figure appeared in the open space 10 meters away. He didn't expect to directly kill the frost giant chieftain. As a legendary creature, the frost giant's vitality was very strong. Even if it was fatally wounded, it wouldn't die in a short time. Sulen didn't want to face the frost giant chieftain's sudden counterattack. Ah! A shrill scream sounded. The frost giant chieftain's giant axe swept horizontally, wanting to attack Sulen. However, Sulen's figure disappeared instantly. The attack missed, and other than making the frost giant more painful, it had no effect. The frost giant chieftain's fighting power could be said to be the strongest that Sulen had encountered so far. If compared to the orc chieftain, it wouldn't take long for the orc chieftain to be smashed by the frost giant. Now that the frost giant chieftain had entered the final stage of madness, it became even more dangerous. The surrounding barbarian warriors all avoided it. Even Su Len didn't want to fight it head-on. After a full minute of madness, the frost giant chieftain's life finally ran out, and its huge body fell to the ground. Su Len also breathed a sigh of relief, then rubbed his sore body. Ding! Congratulations to the host, you have successfully killed the frost giant chieftain. You have received 63,200 experience points, you have received 3 platinum treasure chests, you have received 1 legendary skill point, you have received 3 cold crystal stones. Congratulations to the host, under your leadership, you and your army have successfully defeated the frost giant tribe. You have received 33,000 experience points, you have received 2 sapphires. Ding! Host has killed the frost giant chieftain and defeated the frost giant tribe. Your name has spread far and wide across the wastelands and the continent. Even the far north icy plains have heard of you. Your prestige plus 35. Ding! You have killed the frost giant chieftain and annihilated a frost giant tribe. Your relationship with the frost giants has decreased to hostile. You have received the title, Frost Giant Slaughterer. Frost Giant Slaughterer, with this title, your enemies will be intimidated. There is a certain chance that they will hesitate and retreat. There is a small chance that the enemy will surrender. When facing the frost giant's aggro will be triggered. This title can be hidden. Hearing the prompt in his ears, Su Len relaxed. He arranged for people to help the wounded, let Hathaway lead people to clean up the battlefield, and let people bring the captives from the camp. After arranging the work, Su Len began to check the harvest. Opening the storage space, 3 boxes with a faint golden light appeared in front of him. Su Len took a deep breath and then chose to open them. A burst of beautiful sound and light effects appeared, and the system prompt sounded in his ears. Congratulations to the host, you have opened the platinum treasure chest. You have received 5 skill points. Congratulations to the host, you have opened the platinum treasure chest. You have received the book The Principle and Application of Magic Tattoo. Congratulations to the host, you have opened the platinum treasure chest. You have received the book The Development and Advancement of Magic Tattoo. Chapter 358. Mageweth Tattoo Technique? After hearing the system prompt, Su Len picked up the 2 books in surprise and flipped through them briefly. One of the 2 books was the Basics of Mageweth Tattoo, and the other was Advanced Knowledge. The Mageweth Tattoo Technique was first born in the early days of the Arcane Empire. It was invented by a Red Robe Sorcerers Club, which was a very powerful evil sorcerers organization. How powerful were they? In the entire material plane, more than a quarter of the sorcerers were members of the Red Robe Sorcerers Club, but this powerful sorcerers organization only existed for more than 600 years before it perished. It was said that the organization was destroyed in a civil strife. The development of the Mageweth Tattoo Technique was still thanks to the Red Robe Sorcerers Club. This sorcerers organization was famous for its love of human experiments. After a long period of human experiments, the Mageweth Tattoo Technique was gradually perfected under their continuous experiments. They used the Mageweth Tattoo to engrave spells and permanently enchant the body. This method was very effective. Of course, it also had a drawback. All the hair in the Mageweth area had to be shaved off, and the human body's skin area was limited. Therefore, many Red Robe sorcerers usually shaved off all the hair on their body in pursuit of engraving more spells. Note, the hair on the lower body should also be shaved off. It was also for this reason that the Red Robe sorcerers, regardless of gender, were basically bald. Once the gathering was held, the whole hall would be filled with shiny bald heads. In addition to this drawback, the Mageweth tattoo had another drawback, which was that the tattoo was on the body and could be seen at a glance. This also caused a variety of tattoos to appear on the bald heads of the red-robed sorcerers. Some people could even identify people by the tattoos. After the destruction of the Red-Robe Sorcerers Club, the Mageweth tattoo technique had also spread to other sorcerers' organizations. During the period of the Arcane Empire, some powerful arcanists had improved the Mageweth tattoo technique. This technique was called alchemy engraving technique. This alchemy engraving technique could engrave more spells. Of course, this technique required a higher production process. Moreover, the alchemy engraving technique was not only suitable for magi. This spell could also be engraved on the bodies of ordinary people. In the past, among the followers of the arcanists, there were often professions like rune swordsmen or rune warriors. This was an alternative profession that practiced both magic and martial arts. In the beginning, it was no different from an ordinary warrior. It was also a matter of tempering the body. When he successfully advanced to a grade 1 profession, he needed to choose the direction of his advancement. If this kind of giant body fell into the hands of the necromancers, it could easily be transformed into a powerful undead monster. Sulen, Hathaway, and Alex collected the hearts and blood of the 30 frost giants. At the same time, the body of the frost giant chief was also preserved. It was a very good experimental material. At the same time, a few of the remaining frost giant bodies were also selected. The rest of the worthless ones were burned and buried. The heart of the frost giant was very large. Sulen preserved it in a special crystal container. This crystal container could keep the heart alive. A part of the flesh and blood was also left. The remaining parts were the more precious parts. It was a little difficult to preserve the blood because it was easy to coagulate, and there was too much blood. Hathaway used a special water tank to store the blood. At the same time, she cast a spell on the blood to prevent it from deteriorating and coagulating. Looking at the remaining frost giant corpses that had been burned to ashes, Sulen felt that it was a pity. If there were necromancers around, these corpses could all be used. Now, he could only watch them burn to ashes. Apart from these materials, the equipment of the frost giants and the equipment of the ogres were also collected. Even the camp was turned upside down. In the end, all the resources and captives were brought back to Northern Citadel. The captives were assigned to various construction sites to work. At the same time, they were told the rules and regulations of the northern city. After working for a few years in the city, they would regain their freedom and become free citizens of the city. The weapons of the frost giants were sent to the blacksmith to be melted down and reforged. The giant axe used by the frost giant chief Cursed was left behind. This weapon was not simply made of steel, but was also mixed with many rare metals. It was considered a magical weapon and required the help of a magus to smelt it again. The other materials used by the frost giants were also sorted out and stored. After making all these arrangements, Sulen once again led the caravan to the kingdom of Florence. Of course, this time, he brought along Chris and Karina. The matters of the northern city were temporarily left to Hathaway, with Karina and Grace assisting her. Crete was left to Alex to manage. Even Phyllis Sulen had arranged some work for her. After all, the orthodox education of the royal family was not just for show. Swordsmanship, literature, etiquette, and many other subjects were compulsory for a princess. Moreover, Phyllis's studies were not bad. Sulen let her handle the affairs of the lord's mansion. This time, Sulen planned to go to the kingdom of Florence to recruit some wandering wizards. At the same time, he was also preparing to sell some items. For example, the bottle of life potion that could cause bloodline abnormalities, and the bottle of water demon's blood that could be used to become a bloodline warlock. As for the bottles of life potion that did not have any side effects, they had already been used by Phyllis. After all, whether it was Chris, Hathaway, Alex, or his two personal maids, none of them were ordinary humans. They had long lives and did not need these potions for the time being. However, Phyllis was different. She was only an ordinary human. In fact, Sulen was prepared to let Phyllis use the bottle of water demon's blood to turn her into a warlock. However, after thinking about the limited potential of the water demon's blood, he gave up on this idea. As his woman, she had to be at least a dragon disciple. The water demon's blood's grade was too low. The caravan set off once again. Sulen brought Chris to the cult city. Other than sugar, rum, and spices, the caravan also brought along large amounts of furs and paper. These goods were very popular on the continent. The spices of the northern city were now very famous in the northern countries. Cumin, pepper, chili, and other spices, some of which were even produced by magical plants, were very popular in the north. Although the variety and quantity of spices could not be compared to the spices of the south, after being carefully mixed by Sulen and the halfling Frodo, they tasted very good. At the same time, paper was now a hot commodity in the northern city. The paper sold in the northern city was divided into two types. One was used for writing, and the other was toilet paper. Although the paper used for writing had attracted some attention, it was far less sensational than the toilet paper. Currently, the toilet paper produced in the northern city was crazily sought after by the nobles. In the words of the nobles, they could no longer bear to share knots or linen with others. This kind of soft, convenient, and fragrant toilet paper was the best gift. In fact, the quality of the toilet paper was not very good. It could not be compared to the paper used for writing, but it was unexpectedly popular. The caravan was still very boring. Sulen had no choice but to carry Chris in the carriage and flip through the Mageweth tattoo book that he had just obtained. After gaining the talent of erudite, Sulen's learning speed had increased a lot. It was not difficult for him to learn advanced knowledge like the Mageweth tattoo. He felt that he would soon be able to learn the Mageweth tattoo technique. After learning the Mageweth tattoo technique, Sulen discovered that it was accompanied by the art of tattooing. After learning the Mageweth tattoo technique, one had to master the art of tattooing to be able to perform it correctly. This required Sulen to find time to learn the art of tattooing. Oh yes, this technique also required a prerequisite. The control of the wizard's hand spell had to be precise. Sulen fulfilled this requirement. He was very familiar with the wizard's hand spell. Chris, Hathaway, and the others had a deep understanding of this. Chapter 359. Sulen planned to use the skill points to level up his rune tattoo after learning the rune tattoo technique. This time, he had not used the 5 skill points he had obtained from the platinum treasure chest. He had not even used the legendary skill points he had obtained from killing the frost giant chieftain. Sulen wanted to master the rune tattoo technique as soon as possible. He planned to at least level up the rune tattoo technique to the advanced level. The road from Northtown City to the Kingdom of Florence was quite smooth. The caravan arrived at Calent City after a week. Along the way, no robbers dared to make a move, which disappointed Sulen. Coming to Calent City again, Sulen's mood changed drastically. When he first came to the north, he was envious of the city. Although Northtown City's population couldn't be compared to Calent City, it had reached or surpassed Calent City in other aspects. Compared to the terrible sanitation of Calent City, Northtown City was like heaven. Fortunately, it didn't rain in Calent City, so the roads weren't muddy. The arrival of the caravan from Northtown City attracted the attention of many people in Calent City. After all, Northtown City's goods were popular. As soon as they arrived at Northtown City's warehouse in Calent City, many people who were hungry for profits tried to build a relationship with Northtown City. Unknowingly, Northtown City's existence made the surrounding nobles take the initiative to befriend them. Of course, Sulen was part of it. If it weren't for Sulen, these nobles would have torn off their disguises and started robbing Northtown City of all kinds of things and techniques. Sulen couldn't be bothered with these small fries. He left them all to Xian, the manager of the caravan. Sir Lord. Xian respectfully handed a document to Sulen and said, "This is the list you asked for." This was the list of Calant's nobles that Su Luan had Xian collect. It contained their titles, fiefs, strength, and other basic information. There were also some simple interpersonal relationships. Although this list was simple, it wasn't easy to collect. It could be seen that Xian had put a lot of effort into it. The most powerful family in Calant City was the House of Savoy. Calant City was the fief of the House of Savoy, which was rich in mineral resources. The land around the city was quite fertile, and the transportation was well developed. The House of Savoy also possessed great power. Through the connections on the list, Sulen quickly discovered Marquis Savoy's methods. He had promoted a large number of lesser nobles, and many of these lesser nobles were his knights. These small nobles had no foundation, and their fiefs were only 1 or 2 manors and castles. Thus, they could only rely on the House of Savoy. At the same time, the Marquis of Savoy used various methods to deal with the powerful nobles, such as division, marriage, isolation, and so on. The entire Calant City was completely under the Marquis of Savoy's control. "Sir, after Marquis Savoy heard that you've come to Calant City, he'd like to invite you to a banquet." Xian respectfully handed over an invitation card. "I got it." Sulen nodded and received the invitation card. Sulen had great admiration for this Marquis of Savoy. This Marquis had relied on the northern lands, which was not considered prosperous, to become one of the strongest competitors of the Henry clan in the Kingdom of Florence. This Marquis was quite powerful, having the abilities of a level 4 conferred knight. Moreover, he had many descendants. He had 9 sons and many daughters. This Marquis had made use of his marriage connections to rope in many of the powerful nobles in the Kingdom of Florence. He was very influential in the Kingdom of Florence. He had 7 daughters who were married to nobles of various sizes in the northern lands, and 4 daughters who were married to nobles in the southern lands. Even his granddaughters were being used as marriage connections, looking for nobles who were qualified to be roped in. This Marquis had spent several decades to weave a huge network of connections. This allowed the House of Savoy's influence to rise rapidly. Amongst the 4 marquises, he was ranked last. Right now, even the Henry clan, which was part of the royal family, could not do anything to him. Right now, the House of Savoy was continuously accumulating power. If the Henry clan, which was part of the royal family, were to weaken, the House of Savoy could very well become the new royal family of the Kingdom of Florence. Night fell. A luxurious carriage headed towards the manor of the Marquis of Savoy. The driver of the carriage was a sturdy young man. There were no family emblems on the carriage, but no one dared to look down on it. All the nobles in the city knew that this was the carriage of the owner of the caravan in the northern town. Sulen was wearing a gorgeous hunting outfit as he sat in the carriage. Beside him, Chris was also wearing a beautiful court lady's outfit. At this moment, Sulen was looking at the little succubus, who was wearing a serious outfit, with great interest. One had to know that succubi exuded a kind of seductive charm from their very bones, making people unable to resist. Now that she had changed into a conservative court lady's outfit, her movements were dignified, but there was a different kind of flirtatious expression between her eyebrows. Sulen's heart was on fire. "All right, master, don't touch me anymore. We still have to attend the banquet tonight," the little succubus said with a charming smile. Sulen had no choice but to tidy up his clothes a little gloomily. "My lord, we're here." A guard's low voice came from outside the carriage. At the same time, a few guards at the side hurriedly came forward and asked, "Is Lord Sulen here?" "It's the lord of the northern town, Lord Sulen." "I believe it will be to your taste, the Marquis of Savoy said with a smile. "Thank you very much, Your Excellency." Sulen nodded with satisfaction. Everyone began to enjoy the food. However, other than Sulen, who was eating happily, the other nobles were not in the mood to taste the food. They kept secretly observing Sulen. Sulen's expression was calm, as if he did not care at all. When Sulen was finally full, the impatient Marquis of Savoy could not wait to invite Sulen to his study. It was obvious that they were going to talk business. Sulen patted Chris's hand and took her to the Marquis's study. "Sir Sulen, it is a pleasure to meet you." The study was brightly lit with magic lamps. The Marquis of Savoy sat on a soft and comfortable chair with his son beside him. Although there was no one else in sight, Sulen could clearly sense that there were dozens of elite guards around the room. Sulen smiled and sat across from the Marquis of Savoy. He then smiled and said, "It is a pleasure to meet you too. Sir Sulen, I would like to have a deeper cooperation with you and your northern city. You should know that both of us are in the north. We can have a better cooperation," the Marquis of Savoy said with a smile. "Business cooperation is not a problem. Our northern city welcomes more partners," Sulen said. Sulen naturally knew what the Marquis of Savoy's intentions. However, he did not intend to have a deeper cooperation with him. After all, both of them were in the north. Apart from interests, they were also competitors. Moreover, he had already promised the Henry royal family. He would not go back on his word so easily. This time, he was here for something else. You're tuning in to the Unparalleled SwordWill YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.